All right, we're live.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. It is Tuesday, October 3rd, 2023, and it is 5:34, and I now call to order the City of College Place City Council Workshop. Wait. Will you please take roll call?
Mayor Hernandez,
Present.
Councilmember Jessup,
Present.
Councilmember Cleveland,
Present.
Councilmember Espinoza,
Present.
Councilmember Peterson,
Present.
and Council members Williams, Sherman, and Boyle have asked to be excused. We do have a quorum.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. Will you all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. It's now time for public comment. Sherry, did anyone submit a comment in advance?
I did not receive any comments.
All right. Is there anyone in virtual attendance?
There's no one in the attendees list.
All right. And there's no one present in the lobby. So there's going to be no public comment then. Let's move on to workshop topics. There's 6 of them on tonight's agenda. The first one's going to be the Autumn Meadows and Whitman Park discussion. Mr. Rizzatello.
Okay, thank you. So you may or may not know we have these 2 pieces of property, and in the budget, there was some money set aside to figure out essentially what to do with the pieces of property. So the first one is Autumn Meadows, and Sherry, if you could click on the map document for Autumn Meadows. That is a piece of property, that's the Whitman one. Okay, so Autumn, if you add up everything, it ends up being about an acre, but Autumn Meadows Park, we ended up getting that as part of the local improvement district transfer of assets from Autumn Meadows to the city. And then on the far west side of that is Perseverance Park that the Sherwood group, the leadership class developed. And then with this property specifically, we had the park board and consultants essentially reimagine what could be done with this park. And there were some concepts. First concept was pretty much just putting in grass and maybe playground equipment and calling it a day. The secondary concept, which is the ones that park board decided to recommend to forward to you all for review and ultimately in approval, because there's grants from Recreation Conservation Office are going to be coming up soon. So if we position this thing, we may have the ability to get funded in large part by them. It was really decided to try to do like themes or so with these 2 park properties. So with this one in particular, Sherry, if you could click on the Autumn, let's see here, the Autumn Meadows Concept B document. So we had infographics done for the 2 sites here. So for Autumn Meadows, what you're going to see, what they decided to go along with was to replace the picnic shelter and then essentially put in a meandering path, which if you did a circuit training through it, ends up actually being a 1/4 of a mile because of the switchbacks. And that's because of the steep hillside. And essentially just putting in some nice greenery all through the property and connecting Perseverance Park and Autumn Meadows Park. And really this park, the concept is themed really more so toward an older demographic, since immediately to the north of about roughly by about ½ mile is Lions Park, which is going to have a lot of children's play equipment and things like that. So you can see this is the draft proposal that park park board's been working on the last couple months and recommended to you all. Then I want to show the next one, which is Whitman and Maple. So Sherry, if you could click on the Whitman and Maple map. And then we'll look at the infographic. Whitman and Maple, this is some leftover property that we had for the drinking water well number 6 that we developed. So the rest of the property immediately to the south of that has our new drinking water well on it. Now, some folks have asked, well, hey, why don't you just do a lot split and sell off the north half? Can't, because there is an emergency. There's an emergency essentially crossing for water from the well that goes through that site to the ditch along the south side of Whitman Drive. So State Department of Health, they mandated we put that in the emergency overflow. So what that means is the rest of that property is essentially encumbered by a crossing, and that's the rocks and stuff you see that go across that site in case there's ever an emergency overflow event from the drinking water well. So the park board and the consultant worked on a proposal for this site as well. And Sherry, if you could click on that proposal. Now, this one is aimed for a younger demographic, but mainly because of the neighborhood surrounding it. So you have the apartment complex that will be going in. We're getting pretty close to Lusang on Whitman Drive. So there'll be 180 units right there. And then there's additional housing pretty much in all directions from that site. And what the park board landed on this site, and you can see it's really neat where it encompasses like they have the rock outfall going to the ditch. They have little walkways going over it and essentially have 3 activity centers on the piece of property. And the reason why is there's a lot of debate back and forth about essentially what to do on this site just because of a younger demographic in the neighborhood. And if there's a way to have your cake and eat it too. So that's really what this represents. The south third of the remaining property would be a pickleball court. The middle portion would be a playground. And then the north portion would be like a bike pump track facility over there. And this is pretty much the design was landed on because what park board's really looking at doing is to try and ensure that not like all the parks have the exact same stuff. So depending on what your activity is, you can go to a certain park, especially since really a lot of the check boxes for many activities will be at Lions Park. So for these smaller parks, it really is about narrowing activity centers and making sure that there's actually a use on it. Because with this property, due to the encumbrance from the drinking water well, we have it, so might as well make a constructive use out of it. So park board this past Friday, they voted to recommend these designs to city council. And if city council likes these designs, essentially the general concept would be to eventually pass a resolution backing the designs so that way we could chase down money through Recreation Conservation Office because they have some additional grant dollars that are becoming available through Lumen Field. They actually had to make a separate grant allocation for some development money out of there. So this is what's in front of you. I just want to get this in front of you so we had enough time to work it through the process. Questions?
All right, let's go to council members. Councilmember Jessup.
Thanks, Mike. I had a couple of questions. One, a silly one. What's a pump track? Is that just like a dirt track? But
I've never heard of that either.
Is it just a track that just goes up and down for kids and stuff?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Get your heart pumping.
Yeah, well, I guess so. And you said next to this, there's going to be those apartments and such nearby, so they'll have pretty just down in Whitman, right?
Correct.
I do have a question. So I don't know exactly how the finances work. So if we get grant money for all these parks, and it seems as if we're kind of really kind of busting out a lot of parks. What is the maintenance schedule for these types of things, or if they all, tend to need maintenance at the same time 10 years from now, or whatever that looks like. Is it the cost kind of negligible, or is it, you see what I'm saying with the question? Like, we're doing a lot of really great parks, but then 10 years from now, so we have this big, huge budget item that we have to fix all of them at the same time.
I mean, I really believe they're staggered enough where you aren't really going to have like a major reckoning of all the parks getting hit up at the same time. So, I mean, let's review, for example, Veterans Park that was just put in by Haven Homes. And while we're doing some remedial work out there, that's primarily being paid for by an RCO grant. And then there's opportunities from additional development going along that periphery to do additional maintenance on top of that. And then Kiwanis Park, same thing, south half of that was done in 16. You'll see that the stuff is staggered where it doesn't really hit at the same time. And then the other thing I would note too, because I definitely understand the sensitivity around the park properties, but I would argue if you look at where the population has skewed, it ends up justifying it because like, for example, really all the way up until the Veterans Park development, we were basically at around 4 parks and 15 acres in total, and that was it. Now, to put it in perspective, I'm definitely not saying we go this route because they overdid it, but City of Colfax, which essentially has about a third of our population, flip that, they ended up having about 13 parks. And about like 200 acres of parks. So I'm not saying we get anywhere near that, but I'm just illustrating that for the density we have, which is about 5,000 people a square mile, we really didn't historically have park property. So I really viewing a lot of this as catch up. So I mean, we're trying to make sure it's staggered. There definitely is maintenance expense year to year, but I mean, by staggering it, the hope is to keep up to date on all of that.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike.
Councilmember Cleveland.
These look like great concept designs. I was a little curious. What was the discussion around including bathrooms or not? Was it just kind of a cost issue, or are there other considerations? Or
yes, there was a lot of discussion around that park board level, and pretty much the general consensus was for these smaller parks, really be targeting it for a use or two and not for a spot where people are there like all day, and to be directing like the longer term uses more towards areas that'll have restrooms like Lions Park, Kiwanis Park, Veterans Park will have one thanks to a grant. So that was ultimately where they went. And also, because if you look at the size of Autumn Meadows Park and that slope, even if we wanted one, to be frank, good luck trying to fit it in there. So
thank you.
I would really just having small kids, and like I get the Autumn Meadows one piece, but like for this particular park, in my personal opinion, like it seems to me that it'd be the wisest to have a bathroom, and it would be worthy of the cost. Like I said, because and you guys made mention your demographic makes a difference, obviously. And it seems to me, especially if there's apartments there, and it seems to me if this is a very kid friendly or kid heavy kind of park, it just seems natural to have a bathroom there, because you know what I mean.
Do you know what the smallest footprint of bathroom we could have that would be like ADA accessible? Just like say like a single unisex bathroom, one toilet, one sink, and maybe like a drinking fountain outside. Like how cheap could we get that, and what's the smallest footprint? Because that might be worth looking into if we could just sneak it in somewhere.
I believe we would be able to with the Whitman and Maple site because it's flat. And I want to say a number was like south of like 200 square feet for like one. You can get like those CXT prefab restrooms. So for that Whitman and Maple site, I think we could shove that in there. Definitely with all the measurements that were done in Autumn Meadows Park, I just want to be up front, that would be impossible.
If rather than we bought something prefabricated, would it be more costly or less to build something like just out of cinder block?
With L&I and electrical issues, it actually ends up being cheaper doing the prefab CXT style construction by quite a bit.
Could we make the footprint smaller if it was constructed by us?
Typically the square footage requirements, that's all in the state building code. So you're
Okay.
pretty much like stuck on that.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Peterson?
So Mike, this one park at Maple Whitman is not that far from Kiwanis?
No, it ends up being about 3 blocks.
Right, but compared to the distance between other parks, which could be 6, 8, 10. Yeah, I guess my only point is that if we're getting a grant or if there's funding, it's a great spot. I think it's a great concept. I like all that. Yes? Oh, is it possible, we've got expansions happening in other areas, potentially but then that might be another park.
Yeah.
It's not a choice of one park or not, or no parks, but okay. So I was just saying, to put our money in an area that's not that far from an existing park versus an area where we may be building in the future. Anyway, what do you think about that, Mike?
Good point. The reason why Park Board landed on trying to develop these out is these are pieces of property that we end up with regardless. So you end up with sunk maintenance costs regardless. Because Autumn Meadows Park, that's near a creek, so our stormwater utility has exposure there. And then we picked it up with the local improvement district, and then Whitman and Maple. I mean, that site is encumbered, so we're literally stuck with it. So really it's trying to make lemonade from lemons, if you will. And I'll be upfront. I mean, there will be, especially and you'll see in the capital facility plan, if development goes out like we think it will, there definitely will be parks in the future. And I mean, with the additional population growth, that is going to trigger like additional staff, but that's a general formula as you have a growing community anyhow.
While we're speaking of parks, I just have a kind of this is probably this is off subject, but the small park as we exit College Place on the right, going out 12th Street, that was just what's the name of that?
Perseverance Park.
Perseverance.
That would be part of this Autumn Meadows one.
Okay. Yeah, there's been comments about that were interesting. The park bench there, this is really, Mike, this is like,
Yeah.
This is so, okay. But that the park bench there is facing the traffic. And people have thought about if it was rotated 180, you could look at the mountains. And now there's brush on the other side, which may be out of our control, as far as to be able to see through it or whatnot. But it's interesting that the structure, the bench is cool, park is cool, but the whole idea of able to sit there and look at the mountains or the valley over that edge. Anyway, it was just an interesting versus looking at traffic going back and forth in front of it. But
Well, if you look at that Autumn Meadows proposal, because it actually incorporates that Perseverance Park proposal, the general concept behind that was to reverse the bench, but not only that hillside, the city, believe it or not, owns like the top like 2/3 of that hillside. So that's why you'll see in the Autumn Meadows, there's a bunch of gentle switchbacks. So that way it opens it up for active park use and so forth. And you end up incorporating the 2 parks into like 1 park.
I'll look at that in more detail. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
Councilmember Espinosa, my apologies. I passed you up.
No worries. So I just can't hide the level of excitement because I was part of Parks and Recs before being city council. So I'm excited because we're under parked in College Place. So whenever we look at projects like these that are long-term and are going to impact our community positively, I think it's a great move in the right direction. The question that I have, Mike, on the Whitman and Maple. So my question is, if we can go back to the picture of Whitman and Maple to highlight the square. right there. So my understanding is the city owns the entire parcel. What is preventing the city from giving up the entire parcel to be developed as a park, as opposed to just this square that we are considering?
So the only reason you don't see this is because it's in the next budget, we're actually getting updated aerial imagery. So the thing to notice is that this aerial you're looking at is from 2020. This was before we drilled the well. So that entire portion that looks like there's nothing on it right now has a very large fence and a very significant well house with the entire shaft going down 950 feet to go pull water. So the whole south half of that property is all fenced in and secure because it's a critical water facility now. And in the new aerial that'll get flown in a couple months, once we get it, you'll see that. But this is the best we have for now.
Okay, makes sense, because I was gonna say, well, why don't we just utilize the entire parcel to develop it into a bit of a mid-size park, but if we got the well there and other infrastructure, it wouldn't be possible. I think the concept is great. Are we able to fit all 3 activity centers in that park though? Because it seems like a small residential lot as far as the dimensions of it.
I was very skeptical about that myself because the initial iterations of this actually just had the pickle track and then the pickleball. But we went over it with measurements, and believe it or not, they do all 3 fit there. I was skeptical myself, but if you look at the last park board meeting, there was about a 20-minute back and forth about that, and it does fit.
Oh wow, that's pretty impressive. And you know, regarding the Autumn Meadow, I think that it's just going to add to the Perseverance Park that's already there, and these little pocket parks, I think, are going to continue to add character to our community. They're going to make it seem inviting and open and welcoming, and we need more parks. So I think it's a great idea.
Thank you. I'm going to second what everybody's been saying. I'm quite excited about it. I really like the connection because it gives a walking path. And I think, you know, it's a safe walking path in a neighborhood that doesn't have a lot of roads. It has a lot of roads, so not a lot of safe walking. So I think that's really great. Plus, it allows people to get to know their neighborhoods a little bit different, right? Get off of 12th and down to Harvest Meadows. I think it's quite lovely. And the one on Whitman, how fun is that? That just looks fun. So my question is ADA compliance. Do we see any problems with any of these parks not meeting that?
No, so it was actually reviewed for that.
Okay.
And in fact, Autumn Meadows Park, there was a lot of back and forth about, well, why all the switchbacks? And it was specifically because of the ADA issue, because of how steep that slope is. You actually have to meander it to end up hitting the maximum slope and not get like above that. So that's why you see a lot of switchbacks.
All right, thank you. All right, well, I'm excited to see where they go. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, next is a draft of the fiscal year 2024 state and federal legislative agenda. Mike, you're up on that?
Yeah, next couple ones are long, as we all know, every year. So apologize for it ahead of time, but it is what it is. So, Sherry, if you could first click on the document legislative 2024 early state legislative agenda. And we'll go over each of these. So as you know, every year, so we jointly share a state lobbyist with the Port of the Walla Walla and Walla Walla County. Next year, because it's the even number year, that means that their legislative session is actually only 60 days long. So that means you have to go right out of the gate with all of your demands. Otherwise, you aren't going to get anything, to be frank. So that's why we're having this topic this early, because I would hope that we can essentially get this for council approval sometime in early November, because you have to turn in all the requests through November, because by the time January hits, it's go time. So they get out on time, because frankly, on those even number years, they always try to stick it at the 60-day sessions, because then they're up for re-election. So then they always tend to cut it short. So I'll go, and also of note, for the last 2 years, Association of Washington Cities, they essentially appointed me their legislative affairs committee for the entire legislative agenda for AWC. So I've been on that the whole time. So what you'll see is on the top, we have basic statistics about our community. And then it's split into 2 columns like it always has been. We have the priorities, which dovetail capital on the left side. And then the right side tends to go more so in the policy parameters. So I'll go over the 4 capital ones. The top one is a longer term ask because of the implications, is Western College Place water system. So really the well number 7, which we're currently drilling on Southwest Teal, that's $5 million. We already have earmarks going federally for that, but just trying to get some skin in the game from the state, if you will. And then reservoir number 4, the aggregate cost on that's around 15 million. And a lot of these bigger generational infrastructure projects, which you're going to see in the capital facilities plan, for jurisdictions of our size, nothing is done like in the cone of silence, if you will. Really, the local match on this, and compared to the aggregate total of the whole project, ends up being negligible. Usually anywhere from like 20 to 30%. And then for bigger projects like this, you end up having matches from developers, State Department of Health, Community Economic Revitalization Board, federal government, and so on and so forth. So that water tower thing is very important, because over years, we've said this time and again, we already don't really have enough storage compared to what we should have. So we need to improve upon that. So we're getting near the final engineering plans on that. So really we're positioning ourselves for construction dollars on that. Lions Park Community Center, you're going to hear more about this at the end of this meeting. I was actually skeptical this would go anywhere, but it seems to be going somewhere. There's an earmark floating around for that now. And then there's also a state-sponsored nonprofit childcare that has a state grant that's interested in coming in as a partner. And the Rural Library District, based on the aggregate cost of their building out in Touchy, they've realized that to build alone, it would have enough of an implication on the taxpayers that they really can't do it alone. So they've had their library board meeting. They essentially made a motion to essentially direct to work with us and see if they could get in on this community center project and add a second floor and put a local library branch there and essentially share the facility. So we're going to go over some very early draft plans for this later on tonight, but believe it or not, it's actually coming together. So we're trying to see if we could get some state money for that too. Then replacement police department. I know over years, Troy, Chief Tamaris has alluded to this. I basically put a placeholder in here because we really don't have a final value on that yet. We right now are paying a consultant from Design West, who you all approved a while ago, where they're doing a facility needs analysis, which will actually hone in the actual value on that, but it's important to have a placeholder. And then for good measure, we always include a road project. Now, Majanier Road between the TIF district, the legislative appropriation, and then federal surface transportation money, we pretty much, believe it or not, have that about fully funded. So that's why I didn't put Majanier Road in here. So now you'll see it's some years out now because of the size of Majanier, but trying to get in the heads of the legislative officials about Southeast 12th Street. That is the next one. So basically the College to Sky area. So those are the 4 capital priorities we are floating in front of folks. Now going to the policy issues. A lot of these are pretty similar year to year. There are some key differences this year. So there's starting to be a really big emphasis on the state coming up with their fair share of essentially revenue to help fund operation and maintenance, because they have all these grant programs and loan programs to go build stuff, but then for the operation and maintenance, there's pretty much crickets in the room and quite a bit of that. So there's a lot of proposals at the state level because they have quite a bit. The infusion of money that they have coming in through that Climate Commitment Act and everything else is ridiculous, and they're keeping all of it right now. So there's a lot of proposals to share the wealth and help communities out. So trying to get operation and maintenance money for the infrastructure as well as broadband, then support the state grant agencies that we depend upon. The third one is a little bit of an out there concept, but this has to do with Main Street organizations. And what we're really looking at doing is running a change to the Main Street bill, because it's a really big deal for a community to have an accepted Main Street and a Main Street organization, because businesses who typically would pay their taxes to the state, if you have an approved organization, they can instead pay it to the Downtown Association and get a tax credit. And then there's a lot of money floating around for events and improvements into your downtown. A lot of what you see going on in downtown Walla Walla is financed by that. The bill change we're trying to run is that a downtown association that is in a neighboring jurisdiction a couple miles away and already has business representation in the other community, that they could essentially serve as a downtown group for both communities, and that there would be a different cap for each community. So we wouldn't be hurting Walla Walla's cap, but we'd have our own cap, because I believe Council Member Espinoza remembers this from some years ago. Over the years, we've had various meetings about, hey, why don't we do our own downtown group here, because we are in a Main Street affiliate community. But in the 4 times we've tried it, you have a lot of business folks here that also have businesses in Walla Walla and have involvement in their association. And the general concept is, so what, now you want me on 2 boards? I don't have time for that. So over years, we've always hit like this giant brick wall with it. So I believe this would be the solution, and there seems to be some folks who are backing this, which is pretty cool. Then you'll see preservation and maintenance language around culverts, because the state, through Climate Commitment Act and Ecology, they funded their own culverts, but then they have this ambiguous mandate for other jurisdictions to fix their stormwater infrastructure, but then they didn't pass around any of the money. So in essence, you're fixing, like for instance, Stone Creek runs like under 125. So they'll fix a culvert on State Route 125 and then it gets to one of our roads and you didn't really solve anything because there's a culvert still blocking things. Then supporting tools, incentives, and revenues to increase housing supply and affordability. Supporting fixing the RCW around the multifamily property tax exemption. This is a really important one. So right now we're offering that. The problem is when that bill was passed, there was language that said, oh, it arbitrarily sunsets in 2026 for the areas listed as other communities. So, and they just did that for some reason. No one knows why, but they did. So if that isn't switched, we're going to have like a major issue with that because it's starting to be looked at. Support policies that expand the access to affordable quality childcare, and then also the opposing of state building code changes that preclude natural gas from construction or make other rules of housing unaffordable. That issue, they continue to essentially punt the deadline on that back every couple months because it's working its way through the various court channels. But if you preclude natural gas, that is going to have a chilling effect on the housing costs because of the electrical, and not just that, but I mean, some of the local utility providers, there's skepticism with the timeline. If it did go in, do they have the ability to even meet all of that with their current capacity?
First of all, good pun. I liked it. And then secondly, so the bill, it passed.
Yeah.
It's just working through the legal channels at the moment.
Yeah, it's getting appealed and it's like essentially it's stuck in court at the moment, and the state building code essentially keeps delaying its implementation. So it was supposed to be implemented like this month, and now they punted it out to sometime next year. And there's various bills moving to somehow reconsider it because of it. And it's not that in the future it would be a good thing, but it's just as it stands right now, essentially with your supply and things like that, it's an issue. So, yep. Then general government support, essentially reform of the Growth Management Act pertaining to urban growth areas. And we've definitely felt that over the years. So that's in here. Also ways to reduce impact of abusive public records requests. We kept the language in about bring back the true recycling. And there is a work group on the state level examining that. And then just efforts to review and revise both state and local tax structures so they rely less on regressive revenue options and allow cities to flexibly address communities' needs. And that's because a lot of the implications of a lot of the policies the state has, a lot of it contradicts itself and needs to be cleaned up, but they've not done that yet. And then protecting against liability expansion on the Legislative Affairs Committee, that was brought up heavily. The amount of like new liability and tort elements they're putting on local governments and not fully grasping like, hey, this is going to cost everyone a lot of money. That element has seemed not to hit home yet. And I know our insurance carrier, our risk management carrier, I mean, they're all feeling that because of the extra tort liability that over the last couple of years the state has added. So that needs to be fixed as well. Then supporting the Climate Commitment Act funding for city efforts because they have that bill, but they essentially are keeping the money. None of it's like been passed down, and it's like over what they were projecting. So share the wealth, if you will. And then general government opposing the unfunded mandates. And then public safety and human services. You'll see language around support for additional resources to support police officer recruitment and retention, expanding the training around the basic law enforcement academy and having the regional ones, and then greater access to continuum of behavioral health services. There's a big emphasis on this because these last couple of ones, we weren't the only one that had the impact where we couldn't hire the behavioral health person because of the really ambiguous requirements. That was a deep discussion at the Association of Washington Cities, where a lot of the East Side communities, they had candidates that were, they either had a degree in a similar area or were just about to get the PhD in it. And then because of the very rigid requirements the state has, they weren't able to fill the program. So instead of training someone up and getting the help, there's no one filling that position. So that is a key issue for everyone. So that is the state legislative agenda. I'll go over the federal one next, but before I jump into that one, is there any questions on this first one?
When you said bring back, I think you said real or true recycling, what does that mean?
So basically where it is getting recycled. So like for instance, some of the programs that was like going on in Walla Walla and some of our neighboring jurisdictions like Kennewick, even while this whole sword policy was going on, they kept the recycling, but the recycling was not getting recycled. It was just essentially keeping everyone like trained up on recycle, but you really aren't accomplishing anything. In fact, I would argue it's actually less sustainable because you're sending it to Tacoma, it's getting rejected, then it's getting put on a train, and then put on another train back at Arlington, Oregon, and put in a landfill. So that's really the issue there. So trying to bring back where things are truly getting recycled. And there's a work group around that because pretty much what it's going to take is a really separate things like how it was like back when I was a kid in the 90s when they used to have the trucks where stuff was separated. Because the problem is within the recycling realm, if someone throws in one thing that isn't cleaned up, it contaminates the whole load, and then overseas will not accept it and ends up sending everything back to Arlington.
Okay, I just wasn't sure that's actually what it meant.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially that people are paying for this service because they think it's actually happening. That's what really rubs me the wrong way is people are having to pay for this.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any Councilmember Jessup?
Is this an appropriate time to ask real quickly about the replacement policeman department? Is this
Yeah.
So I should have done my homework, so I apologize for this. Is that in the same budget line item as it would be for other resources for the police, such as staff, such as other police officers, so on and so forth? Is that within the same realm?
No, it would be in a separate, it would be in a capital line item for police. And you'll see in the capital facility plan when we get like later into it, because there's like a page for every project. That's going to be a layered cake of essentially how to pay for it if we do go that route. And again, we'll have a greater grasp over the next year on what the true need is. It's merely a placeholder.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're kind of looking ahead, right? Which is always, thank you. The replacement department kind of concept or whatever, kind of initial placeholder, it seems to be that would kind of fulfill that public safety, human services kind of agendas that we're supporting.
Yeah, and I mean, where I got the ballpark number on that from was City of West Richland, because they just redid theirs. So that's pretty much where I borrowed that.
Yeah, we're kind of dovetailing the legislative needs in the state and mandates with that. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Are you done with that section then?
Yeah, that section. Then I'll go with federal one.
Okay. Okay. I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right ones here.
Okay, now the federal one is up.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, federal legislative agenda, I won't go over capital priorities, same thing. The only thing with the federal government, which is pretty interesting, is with state government, they want to know what the aggregate cost of the whole project is. And with federal government, when you go in there, they run the bills and they really aren't too interested in the total cost of everything. They generally want to make sure whatever you're asking for a project is like less than 5 million. That's their magic number. So that's why when you pass out these flyers, you always make sure it has a number of 5 million or less on the ask to the feds, because they literally take like 30 seconds, look at it, and then their staff figure whether or not they want to support it or not. So that's why you'll see that the capital side looks a little different, where we have in bold the asks, because that's just how they do business in DC, which is a little different than Olympia. So the key issues here differ because, again, with the federal government, you're dealing with a lot more macro level policy decisions. So naturally, we support the Highway 12 Phase 8. So Phase 7 is done, and that would naturally would be, that'd just be really bad if after all that work you left the last 10 miles just hanging out there. So that needs to be looked at. Then the second thing, which thanks to our lobbyist, John Colton, he notified me of this. So there is a grant program that the Army Corps of Engineers has, and it's called Section 219. And if you have an area of a state that's authorized for it, you essentially can put in projects, and the Army Corps will pay for 75% of projects with a 25% match. The weird thing is, so they ran a bill about a year or two ago to include Washington, but for some reason in the final bill, only Western Washington was added. So like the Interstate 5 corridor. And from what we're gathering, someone made like a Scribner error or something, because when John Colton left Senator Murray's office, it was in there for Eastern Washington. So they're redoing the act pertaining to water and wastewater infrastructure coming up here. So the key thing is we're trying to add in some authorities so Eastern Washington is added to that. Because if we get 219 where it covers this area, that's a big game changer for us. So that's a big deal. Third thing is resources to help with the housing crisis. Fourth bullet point deals with child care. Fifth point is simplifying the process for pursuing federal grants pertaining to USDA Rural Development and Department of Transportation, because the staff here will tell you you eventually get the money, but the amount of hoops they make you jump through is something else. So that needs to be improved upon. Then likewise, supporting the enhancement for HUD community development block grant programs. So really we're advocating where entitlement could go like back to the county and city levels, because where you end up with the community development block grant program at the state level, they can just like ambiguously make their own rules. And we've had an issue with that. We're really, with the two block groups that qualify, we should be able to fix up Birch Street and Broadway and some of the roads where the block group goes right down the middle. And according to the feds, you can. But then when you talk to the state, they have the opinion that, oh, well, the rich side of the street's benefiting, so no. Well, the enabling bill does not say that at all. That's a bias they have. So that needs to change. Economic Development Administration, that's the next one. So supporting that so it's more conducive to the needs of small and mid-sized communities, because we're finally getting somewhere with them. But the big issue is that they'll initially say, oh, we want to fund your infrastructure. And then they seem mystified when your job totals don't equal that of like a Metro Seattle or Tacoma Eddy. And it's like, well, we're in Walla Walla County, of course it wouldn't. And they seem not to understand that concept. So trying to make sure that they actually do serve small and mid-sized communities would be good. Also, continued passage of comprehensive infrastructure financing bill, that's moving. Supporting legislation for a small business ecosystem, supporting local control, and then we kept in the language about the alternative compliance paths for the PCBs, that ties the wastewater treatment plant. Also passage of legislation dealing with mental health, because that really transcends all levels, and then also support for the Wainwright Veterans Administration campus. And we're trying to get out ahead of that because the VA is starting to build ancillary facilities out in Tri-Cities, and they're being very coy about what that's going to eventually do with our facility here. So we need to really watch that. And then also projects that make State Route 125 corridor conducive for economic development, because as you know, eventually the state wants to be examining those intersections, just making sure feds as well as the city is at the table, and then opposing unfunded mandates. But those are the two draft agendas as they're currently constituted.
Any questions?
First of all, I think it's funny. By the way, unfunded mandates we oppose. That's always funny.
Yeah.
And so there was a big push in the last legislative session about broadband and expansion. Is that not on this the agenda this year?
Well, it's on there. In fact, on the but the thing is, the federal government did their part of it. So reiterating it, it wouldn't really do anything because it's out there.
Yeah.
It's actually on the state legislative
I
agenda.
missed it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's at the first bullet point because they're sitting on like a boatload of BEAD money, and they just actually haven't decided how to send it out yet. So we're really going to have to lean on them to actually get it out.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry I missed that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Nothing. Councilmember Espinosa, any questions?
No questions.
All right. All right, so then we're going to move on to the next item, which is the draft of fiscal year 2024 to 2029 capital facilities plan.
Okay, thank you. So this is the long ones here. So I'll try to go through this as fast as possible. Please review them at your leisure. That's why we get them out ahead of time like this. Now, when it was sent out to you, we just compiled the draft spreadsheet because putting these booklets together takes a lot of time. So they just got out yesterday, the booklet form, but the summary has been out. So I'll go through the booklet form, and this just follows essentially the state best practices around capital facility plans, and they're done in the 6-year window. The first year tends to be more concrete, and the subsequent next 5 years after that tend to be more for planning period. And the other thing to note too is we'll go through the pages, and this dovetails into what was discussed a little bit the last meeting, is that what gives us a little bit of mobility and wiggle room in budgets to work through economic development, economic conditions, and then also capitalize on grants, if you will, is that each of the projects has a ranking of like high, medium, and low, and what that is high means that pretty much regardless, it's go time and we need to get it done, and that usually has to do with requirements for the end of a grant or just raw need. Medium is, again, if the resources are there, locally, and then we're able to get grants and economic development conditions warring it, going for it. And then low pretty much is if things are rosy and let's say a grant covers majority of it and it's a longer term thing, we'll do it. But then if stuff goes south, it ends up getting mothballed. And in fact, I mean, this ranking system for 6-year plans, that's a big reason why during COVID we didn't have to like layoffs and things like like that, like other jurisdictions, because by doing this, we have the wiggle room to juggle things, if you will. So this page just has a listing of the CFP team, everything. Next slide. Okay, so again, this just goes into what everything is, and showing that when you do these capital facility plans, they're essentially tied to they end up being tied to your Growth Management Act, and the key thing to know this, because you'll see compared to like other cycles, if you look, there's some similar projects going on, is that really inflation and supply chain issues have delayed a lot of things. So that's why there's been carryover or federal requirements. I mean, Lions Park is a shining example of that one. If the federal agencies didn't keep going back and forth and actually talked with each other, we probably would have already built it by now. But that's a good case in point. And then the other thing that I'll mention too is that a lot of the streets where people may be like, oh, hey, why are you fixing up like 4th Street, for example, and Birch looks horrible? Well, it's because those bigger streets we're able to federally classify and we get grant money. Local streets we're on our own with. What you're going to see in this capital facility plan too, which is a big change, is that we actually did a forecast of like what streets we would potentially deal with if you all adopt that 1/10 of 1%, because that way actually then bring in a revenue source to more proactively start dealing with these streets. So you'll see as we get into the later slides that our sidewalk program and then that block resurfacing program, those those really jump up because of the revenue enhancement. Next slide. Just listing the key projects which we're focusing on. So wastewater, if you will. So we have this like broken up into various enhancements. And if you looked at the summary spreadsheet, we're dealing with the phase 1A, if you will, which is like the filter upgrades and general things we have to do no matter which way we go, whether we're doing the whole wastewater thing ourselves or partnering with City of Walla Walla. So that is the $5 million. If you look in a summary spreadsheet or when we get to a page later details this project, you'll see that the remainder of that money ends up getting spent out over the next couple of years, just because doing a big project like that takes time naturally. Lions Park renovation. I just upped that to 6 million. Engineers estimates less than that, but just seeing how the bids have come in, I'm trying to be pessimistic. So we don't end up with a problem. So that's why you see that. C is current expense Majania roads. So next year, we're going to really get into acquiring the right of way. Engineering will be done by the end of this year. So next year will be a buying right of way year. And then likely getting the thing out to bid, we're probably the start of the actual reconstruction will be next year. That's a big enough project where that's actually going to go through 2024, 2025. Stormwater, the decant facility. And again, this is a good example of things being delayed. A lot of these grant agencies, they've had staff just up and quit or retire. So you'll be waiting for a contract and it's like, oh, we don't really have anyone. So you need to wait a minute. So this decant facility, we were supposed to get the grant agreement on that over a year ago. And we end up recently getting it. So that hung it out a year just to show you that. Lift station number 5, that's the one that's replacing the coffee can contraption on Southwest 1st Street. So we're at full engineering on that. So we'll be moving to construction on that next year. And the property that we bought from Victor Valerio, that's been taken care of. So now we have a site to put that at. And then drinking water well 7, that is in process of being drilled on the land we already own off of Teal. We have an appropriation tied to that, and then we're chasing additional money for that. Next slide. And again, just showing that a lot of this is tied to various elements of our comprehensive plan. Next slide. And then our strategic plan as well that goes through 5 tenets. And for time's sake, I'm not going to go through all of that. Next slide. Okay, and that covers the additional. And then the long-term financial strategy. This was essentially, that's in our financial policy that we have adopted. But just as a reminder, I have this also as a tenet within this booklet. Next slide. And then this just goes through the capital facility plan process. We're really starts in August, just trying to get out them to department heads, what is the outlay? And then we work to essentially narrow it and tie revenues to it. And then we start to essentially start having these publicly facing meetings about this with you all, as well as our advisory committees, such as Economic Development Commission, Utility Commission, and the Park Board. And then typically by November, there'll be recommendations out of those committees. And then usually if everything is all good, the public hearing and expected passage of these 6-year planning documents is usually the last meeting in November, because we try to get the 6-year plans adopted, because that way, by the time you hit the meeting in December, a lot of your budget's fairly solidified, and then that makes a fairly linear pathway to adopt the budget. Next slide. Then a list of completed projects, definitely with the supply chain, inflation, and just grant agreements being forever to get through. But didn't accomplish as much as we wanted to, but still quite a bit. You saw we have additional sidewalk finally constructed on Southwest 6th and Southwest 8th. So that ends up being just shy of about 1,600 additional feet of sidewalks. The room we're sitting in finally got done. Also chip seal and some block resurfacing. And then pretty soon here, getting Autumn Meadows Road squared up, and then well number 2 replacement. We've been talking about that since first started here, and we finally got that temporary VFD to start pumping water from it, and we'll get the permanent VFD in and keep the other one on the shelf so we never have to deal with discombobulations like we have again. So well, all in all, things have been going decent. Next slide. Now we start to get into the future planning cycle, and you'll see that I tried to use charts showing essentially what the breakup is between the department functions for this upcoming fiscal year, which again, you're having to tie a lot more concrete revenues to it versus 6-year, which is a little more ambiguous because you're trying to take your best guess on things. So you'll see in 2024, the key driver areas is parks naturally, mainly because of Lions Park, streets, and a lot of this has to do predicated on the hopeful passage of the TBD, but then also getting Majania Road teed up and ready to go, and then wastewater because we're starting to get going on the treatment plant, some sewer lining with the ecology finance offer y'all approved a couple months ago. I mean, that thing actually covers 10 years worth of sewer lining. So we'll be going light years ahead on that. So those are key components for 2024. And then the 6-year period, you'll see the major outlier is streets, which I mean, that's not really a surprise with all that we've gone over in the past. Next slide. Okay, then here is just the chart and then the aggregate level for capital facility plan for next year. And you'll see the total is around 33 million between all departments. Next slide. And then for the 6-year total, that if everything was done, that'd be around 148 million. What you'll see in the following slides, though, is a lot of this is not predicated on our own resources. So in the planning document, what you'll see is that almost 60% of this is predicated on grants, development contributions, and the like. So that gives you a little flavor. Next slide. Then anticipated revenues, as you can see here, over 59.4% is contingent on grants and future developer contributions. And then 41.6%, that would be funded by various elements of the city. And a number of them wouldn't exactly be occurring on a time scale unless like things happen. But it's important that we have an element of what's out there should everything happen, so we aren't just caught off guard. Next slide. Again, prioritization is very important as we continue to deal with supply chain inflation, and then things get done naturally as in high priority projects are prioritized and as funds permit. As I said, everything is ranked with that high, medium, and low, so we have flexibility as conditions arise. Next slide. Then this is just a draft map of everything and numbers for all the projects if folks want to know where they're at. Next slide. Okay, we get into facilities next. So City Hall, a couple of things going on here. Really, it's trying to get to really what this building was originally designed for. So if you look at the original plans from when this was constructed back in the early 90s, they originally had office space going out to the street. And then because of revenue pictures at the time, that part was just never done, but the plans were there. And as we have grown city, growing staff, I mean, our city attorney works out of what was a break room with a sink in it, and our IT director is in a closet. So we're definitely tight for space here. So you'll see the Sallyport conversion, definitely an important thing. So trying to get some money out of FEMA, their hazard mitigation grant program, and state commerce. They have money for these facilities. And then also a big part of what we did as well is when we were doing the tax increment finance district, that was one of the reasons why we pared down the aggregate number. Because if we're really trying to deal with everything all at once, we would have took out a higher TIF district, but we have needs here. So that was why we did that, to try to accommodate for things. And then there's other grants we'll try to chase for and make it happen. But just to illustrate, the space is definitely an issue. And then as we get into 2026, a lot of this stuff you have seen in the past iterations of the capital facility plan. So wrapping up the rest of the parking lot, fixing that up because we redid half of it a couple of years ago. So redoing the other half, and then beam repair and paint. And then 2027, some remaining landscaping and restroom renovation. Next slide.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
Sorry, is there, I know we're gonna have to like essentially rent out some of the space in the parking lot for the apartments in
Yeah.
order to stay compliant. Does any of that kind of stuff needs to be changed or done to stay compliant with that?
When we did the lease with that parking lot, that was taken into account the spaces we had of the parking lot we already did. So, so we'll be fine.
Yeah, that's great.
Yep. Fire department, I mean, a lot of this is not new stuff at all. The regional training tower, it's done, they're using it. So essentially continuing our contributions. There's 3 years left on that, then it'll be fully paid off. And that facility was like, the old one was from the 70s. So it's definitely a great investment. And since that time, we've actually seen the number of volunteers increase dramatically too. So definitely a good investment. I mean, they actually have a waiting list for volunteers like to live in the dorms and to join. So that's definitely unheard of now. So yeah.
I saw somebody moving in today.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. And then 2024, you'll see now, in order to really keep our volunteers up, I mean, a key thing is make sure you have a good place for them to live at. So fixing the staircase, renovate the dorm rooms, the furniture, and then make sure they have a similar key card system to us, because City Hall and Police Department versus Fire Station station is way different. So the electronic key card system here was done a lot later. The fire station was done very piecemeal in the early 2000s. So very archaic key card system that needs to be changed out. And then 2025, and a lot of this would be funded by state commerce grants and the like, is us doing some HVAC work, because again, that facility looks good and we just have to keep it in prime condition, but keep in mind that is from the early 2000s. So just making sure we keep everything updated, and then fixing out some of the flooring, because it definitely gets a lot of wear and tear with all the use in there. Next slide. Then you'll essentially see there's like an either or type thing. So replacement police department study, we're in the midst of doing that. And once they have, they're going to involve the community and develop various iterations for what the needs are. Because if we're truly going for this thing, we want to be in a place where we're designing something that's going to be good for decades out. So we don't have to revisit this thing. So that's what the study is going to say. And then again, and a lot of this will be predicated by what's found during the study and what the steering committee says, and based on that feedback and resident feedback, where to go. But I would imagine that a lot of the split is going to be between like a federal earmark and then a voter approved bond. And if that did go through, then that would pay for it. If it didn't go through, then we would just need to do rehab work on the existing police department. But keep in mind, that's a very nebulous issue because that building was not meant for that. That was originally apartments and an automotive repair shop. So not really the most secure place. So I do have like an off ramp if that ended up somehow going sideways, but at least you have a flavor of where things are, what the plan is.
Mike, I'm sorry, one more.
Yeah.
I see the picture. Does the study and such still include that range?
Oh yeah, the range is staying out there for now.
Is it a part of the conversation in regards to some of that regional training, like being a facility or a hub for the regional training facility, or potential revenue stream to help pay for some of the stuff, or is it negligible, or how's that?
It ends up being negligible because, and here's the reason why. If it wasn't for us having that training facility, there would actually be a lot of training we would have to pay a lot of money for. Right. And we end up essentially horse trading, if you will, where it's like, hey, you can use our gun range, and then we end up getting free training. So I mean, that's some of the stuff we have to take into account.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. So in terms of like some of the study to see about replacement or in the budget items as being low, medium, or high. Yeah. Is a part of that conversation or part of that study looking into that range and making most efficient use out of it for that's essentially going to be I would say an appendix to it. The primary motive of that is figuring out what the true space is for the general police operations. Now it is going to definitely address that gun range for sure, but the main focus is looking at like facility that
makes
sense.
But it'll definitely be in there.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so that gets into the general brick and mortar of stuff. Now going into infrastructure. So next slide. And then just throwing up some images that makes it easier to read this whole thing. Next slide. And again, year to year, we break it up by the type of infrastructure. So you'll see it goes from parks, then into the public works elements of parks, storm, streets, wastewater, and water. And then there's a picture of whatever we're dealing with, as well as where's it located, and then the split of where we think the funding will come from. Next slide. So Lions Park, Been talking about this a long time. So finally with this thing, from what I've heard from all federal agencies, I believe that we will have the permission to get this thing out to bid this month and then see where the bids end up landing. So you'll see there's a big split as far as where monies come from. Big kudos to the staff and everyone for chasing down the money. There's 3 state RCO grants towards this thing, Sherwood Trust, State Ecology Storm Grant. There's a Port Point 09 grant. There's a litany of Blue Zone grants, with some private donations. Then we have some city REIT 2 and some storm money to go towards it. And keep in mind, now that this community center thing is gaining legs, I'm referring to it as like a phase 1, phase 2 type deal. So this original project is the phase 1. And then the phase 2 you'll see later is dealing with the community center. So that's Lions Park. Next slide. Then Veterans Park, and this will be a multi-year project, but fairly linear. Really, it's just adding additional facilities to make that park more usable, since there's a younger demographic there. So restroom, picnic shelter, basketball court, pickleball court, and RCO. City Council accepted that grant agreement. So yeah, we'll be working on engineering that thing and figuring out and getting all that done. Next slide. Then Autumn Meadows Park, we just went over that. So these are some boilerplate costs that I ended up getting from the consultant PBS. And again, really the planning on these parks are fairly long runway, going through like 2026 or so, because we're trying to aggregate grant money and make it happen. Next slide. And then Whitman and Maple, you can see the rock outfall area in that picture right there. And then you can see in the far back the black fence that essentially blocks the well house over there. But again, you'll see the breakout on that. There's actually a lot of nonprofit grants that go toward pump tracks. So this one should be relatively easy to fund, I believe. Next slide. And then Kiwanis Park rehab, and that's essentially in 2 elements. So element number 1, which would be next year, and there's actually an RCO maintenance grant that I'm expecting will be given, and that will help to fix the electrical out there and then to re-roof the picnic shelter because the roofing has issues on it. And we're trying to spiffy that up because since Lions Park is happening, the farmers market is going to shift over there for the year because we learned our lesson with the public outcry not to be having it over here. So, so sorry, Sherry and Nathan. Yeah. So, so we'll be having a Kiwanis Park. So we're trying to get the necessary infrastructure because part of the reason we didn't have it there is we do not have a good electrical system out there. And then a couple of years down the line, chasing some commerce funds to put the lighting that could be turned on for pickleball and basketball, since folks are still bringing their own Home Depot lighting out there to play at night. So big deal. Then to do a lot of other stuff, some of the parks that don't have the immediacy end up getting punted out some. So Harvest Meadows Park got put to 2028 because condition of it is good. It's just essentially just doing some minor improvements around some signage, picnic shelter, things like that. And they, again, REIT 2, we're trying, that bucket of money is really created to be trying to have a source for parks. Next slide. And then park development is Stone Creek, and this one is essentially a wild guessing estimate. But when with that lakeside development is coming down the pike, and we're starting to have like meetings about that, and the plans will be moving your way soon enough. That will, between that and the eventual new school and everything out there, that will trigger a new park. So putting a placeholder, because the discussion is, yeah, you can build, like for instance, good example is Homestead. Yeah, you can get the land dedicated for a park, but do you just have the park and there's nothing in it, or do you actually try to build it the correct way? So we're trying to take that into account, so it's a park that everyone is proud of. So you can see the guesstimated split there. Next slide. And then this, we'll go over floor plans later and they'll be zoomed in. But this project in total would be about 10 million. I'm very optimistic that we're going to actually get there though, because I mean, we just came up with conceptual stuff, and that 2.5-year mark is floating out there for this. And then that ELF childcare grant is for another 2.5. So we're barely out of the gate and have 5. So you're near halfway there. And then the library district at their board meeting, I mentioned that I thought fair, equitable way is we would look at this would maybe be split the costs in thirds and then chase after grants and buy it down from there. But we're already tying together a lot of grant money. So I mean, this definitely looks like it's going to move forward. But again, a lot of that is going to be tied to solidifying these grants and getting it done. Next slide. So that deals with parks. Now this is federally classified roads. Call attention to this again, because a lot of folks essentially make remarks about what we're funding and why, and anything that is color coded like that we can get grant money for. Anything that's not, that's in gray, we're on our own with. Next slide. Full corridor projects. So I think it's key to separate out streets into 2 elements. Full corridor means we're redoing the street and a utility underneath, and then streets is just a street project. Next slide. Southeast Mid-John, that is the big one. So as it stands right now, we believe between the right-of-way and the street costs and the utilities underneath, just shy of 8 million. As it stands right now, we essentially have it where 31.6% is that federal earmark from Representative McMorris Rogers, 12.2% is from the Metropolitan Planning Organization, 1.9% is from the storm utility, and 54.3% is from tax increment financing. I think there's a good likelihood, though, we may get a Transportation Improvement Board grant too. And if that ends up coming through, that essentially is going to buy down what we're going to have to take out in TIF and the storm utility. So this is just what's guaranteed right now. Next slide. Cedar talked about this for a while. This is a interesting project just because there's storm issues over there, and the pavement is definitely has seen better days. We've tried to get federal and state appropriations for it. We can still try. And you'll in the spreadsheets, you'll see that we have essentially money plugged in if that TBD were to pass to essentially finally do something with this. We originally tried to bake this into a couplet project to tie a C Street some years ago, but TIB changed how they do things and we were not able to do that. Next slide. Then because of Mid-John Road, that tends to shift out 12th some. Now this is just essentially if the grants take a while to get. We continue to chase after a lot of federal and state grant money, and depending upon the success of that, it could dramatically jump this thing quicker. It just depends how successful we are. So 12th College at Large, this is dealing with essentially doing new utilities underneath and then redoing the pavement. And because it's federally classified, there's a lot of different buckets to essentially go at for money. It's just, it's going to take a while. And I mean, the one that scored more points up until now was Majanier, just because of how bad it was. So that's why 12th didn't really hold a candle to the win, because this was way, Majanier was way worse. Next slide. And then this actually goes out past the planning cycle. I just put in money for 2029, and then construction would be 2030, but dealing with the other portion of 12th from Myra over to Larch, and again, doing utilities and the like. Next slide. And then Dewey Drive, this one, a local road again, which is our big issue with a lot of the roads that need updating. So you'll see essentially a proposed split on that to essentially redo that roadway. Next slide. Okay, so that was streets. So now we get in a storm. Next. Storm to camp facility, mentioned that earlier. Engineering will be doing that next year. Construction would be 2 years out. That's a big deal for our storm permit. The place we're going to put it at is actually out near the wastewater treatment plant, just because it has appropriate surroundings around it, out by a public works yard, the state, just because of how urbanized it is over there, it's not appropriate. So that is where we would aim that at. Next slide. Birch, 4th to 6th. So this got delayed some. Just due to some projects getting scored a little bit higher, but we're putting in for it again, and we got comments back where we believe we've positioned it for success. So we're aiming this thing for engineering in 2024 and then construction in 2026, and it's to get appropriate storm infrastructure. Right now, there's a creek that's dry most of the year, but when it is active, it goes right through the public works yard and then just drains out on a Birch Street. So this actually put in appropriate infrastructure to deal with that. And with the storm utility, a nice thing, since we have the utility, that opens up a lot of the grant funds from the state, where the lion's share of that is borne by them. Next slide. Dry well installation. This was the report y'all approved some years ago. So every other year we try to put some dry wells in the area around College Avenue, because a lot of those streets don't have the greatest stormwater infrastructure. And that study that was paid for by a grant shows that the ground will take it. So we try to essentially pursue this program every other year. Next slide. And then public works yard, we're filing ecology grants for that, putting in appropriate stormwater infrastructure, because going back to earlier comments, there is a creek that, while is dry most of the year, when it's filled with water, it goes right through that area, and then it's like going between a couple of homes on the surface, and that isn't really appropriate. So putting in the appropriate piping to deal with it. Next slide. Then Earl Lane. This one was from some years ago. Originally, we thought we fully dealt with the issue with Destito, but we found it's a bigger issue where there is flooding on Earl Lane as well. So we're basically going after ecology grants to deal with that same way we dealt with Destito and get it taken care of. And that'd be between 2024, 2026. Next slide. Then 10th Street, College to Bade. This is a follow-up to a project we did a couple of years ago, 10th from College to Birch. So basically, right now, that street just sheet drains right into Garrison Creek. So they actually put in curb and gutter and treatment and deal with it correctly. And then put in a sidewalk because right now there is none. So this essentially would deal with that last leg of 10th. And a lot of this can be covered by grants from the state. Next slide.
That would be so much better.
I know. This one I'm really excited about.
Hold on, Mike.
Oh.
Councilmember Peterson has a.
Yeah, I think that's an area too. When it comes to stormwater, yeah, as far as what is our process right now? Are we in the process of testing upstream, downstream
Yeah.
currently?
Yeah, Laurencio does that.
What's that?
Laurencio, our stormwater technician,
Okay,
he works with the state to test at certain points through Garrison Creek, Stone Creek, Military Springs,
Yeah,
and Dome
yeah.
Creek.
that 10th Street, I think we've discussed that in the past, that's yeah, there's a real opportunity there probably to control some
Yeah.
pollutants that could get into that, yeah. So,
Yep.
yeah, anyway.
This next one I'm excited about. So we put in for this grant a couple of weeks ago. It was from the Inflation Reduction Act, and of several jurisdictions in the state, we were one of 6 to get it. So from the U.S. Forest Service, we're actually getting $730,000 to go put in trees and sprinkle irrigation along Majanier Road as part of our Majanier project. The new east-west road that developer is putting in that we're helping with, it'll go from the high school to the new school eventually, 12th Street. And then also the portion that up until recently we couldn't do anything with, but knock on wood, if you all approve the annexation with Martin Airfield, Whitman Drive from Homestead to Hampton Lane will become ours. And then with that, the portion from Homestead to Hampton Lane, there is space between the road and the multi-use path to put trees and irrigation. The county just didn't do it, so this grant would pay for that. So they made the announcement, so $730,000, it's a full grant for it. So
Congratulations.
thanks. Next slide. Yeah, outfall. Similar to the dry wells, we try to fix outfalls every other year. And we have a whole list of them where we try to split it between the utility and the grant. So this is worst case scenario. Because of our hardship criteria, we're working with JUB on a grant program similar to like what we did with the sewer lining to see if we could get a large amount of money and knock out a bunch of these outfalls. So stay tuned on that. And then next slide. And then Dade Avenue, just fixing the stormwater there. There's like a dip at Garrison Creek and it floods. So dealing with that by 2028. Next slide. Then street projects. Now this isn't, this is just dealing with surface, not dealing with utilities mainly because utilities underneath typically are usually good where we don't have to rip them up. In this, you're going to see that some of our core programs that used to be very skeletal have a lot more in it, and it would be predicated on the Transportation Benefit District passing. Next slide. So chip seal, this is funded by an existing source, the real estate excise tax one, and would continue to. And this is the laundry list. And this is basically to make sure the roads don't break apart for the local roads. So you could see the long list there. And basically we use the pavement management report coupled with the public works staff examining the roads, and that's where you get the list at. Next slide. Then the block resurfacing. Now this has a heavy transportation benefit district focus. And a lot of this was based upon cross-referencing roads that were listed in the worst condition or had some subsurface issues that were identified in the pavement management report. So the first $34,000 would be funded by REIT one as it is right now, but then the remainder essentially would be the proposed TBD revenue. So 2024, dealing with Cotter Place, which is a cul-de-sac off at 12th. 10th between Birch and Date going the other direction. That's in really bad shape. Pinewood, and then the last block of Birch heading up to 12th Street. And then essentially finishing off Southwest 8th between College and Bathe. 2025 would be dealing with Broadway, Mockingbird, Birch up by Davis School, the really narrow portion, and then the really narrow portion at 8th between Whispering Creek and Larch by Lions Park. And that's going to be really important because that's going to really have to be improved if with the new park, and if the library ends up going over there, we need to make sure the sidewalks and stuff are A, there, and B, safe. 2026, Mockingbird over by Country Estates, and then the north leg of Highland Park. 2027 would be Dawson up in Sunset Villa area, and then the remaining little cul-de-sacs and Country Estates, which believe it or not are public roads. So those are our responsibility, but they're local. And then 2028 is dealing with the public roads in the Sunset Villa area. Now that is a mixed bag because half the Sunset Villa has two parts that 55 plus community off of Myra. The first half nearest to Myra has public streets, but then the west half is private roads. So really strange, but we can at least deal with the public portion. And then 2029 would essentially deal with Davis over by the WEC, and then the Highland Park South leg, and then Southeast Avon. And that would, again, this is all predicated on TBD. If you don't pass it just based on our funding sources, it would once again narrow down to like a block of road. Oh, yeah.
Mike, in my memory is probably failing me here, but did the library, in our discussions years ago with the library, I was under the impression, and I thought the discussions were that they were sitting on a sizable capital fund at that time, or
They do have a sizable capital fund, and that's why they'll be able to pay their portion of it. It's just, I'll just couch it this way. The cost of how much a library actually costs to build in 2018-19 versus now is like night and day. So back then, the nest egg they were talking about was in the range of, like, for instance, like $5 to $6 million. And the part where it really scared them, which is why they talked with us, is I guess they're in the process of rebuilding the branch over in Touchy.
Yeah.
And the recent numbers for Touchy was between 13 and 14 mil.
That's crazy.
So if they're doing that for Touchy,
Yeah.
if they did, and they wanted to build a way bigger one out here,
Right.
where does that? So that's why they're like, could we actually get something done with the nest egg we have by partnering?
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that, because I was under I thought they were ready to.
They were
Standalone, find land and go, but
oh, they had land.
times, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The times change.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Yep.
Thanks, Mike.
So that's block resurfacing. Next slide. Safe Walk, and there's a lot of information here, and you'll see this dramatically increases. So with the Transportation Benefit District, with research, you end up getting additional points for the streets in our two block groups. So I think we'd actually get way more funded, and then it actually having a TBD, also a funded one, also opens up money for safe routes to school. So we actually have potential to get quite a bit of like matching grant money, it turns out, if you do this. So you'll see that there's similar projects you've seen over years, but then additional ones. And The key thing to know is there's two components of this. What we're trying to do is every year maybe knock out 1 or 2 segments with construction and then tee up 1 or 2 segments with engineering so we could go get money to build it. So 2024, basically dealing with Southwest First, which we are going to deal with the lift station. They're actually funding us to go put sidewalk over there, which is pretty cool. And then Southeast 8th, College of Birch, we did get that federally classified. So the MPO is giving us some grant money for that. And then trying to tee up engineering for Northwest B Street and Northeast Ash. 2025 gets to constructing 8th and then B, and then Ash, and then engineering the next extent of Southeast 8th, Birch to Larch, and then which we put in for TIB grants for already, and then Birch, pretty much a whole extent of Birch. Then 2026 is dealing with 8th, and then engineering would be Southwest 2nd, Davis to Academy Way, and then Southeast Central, 12th to Sunny. Then 2027 would be construction of Birch, and then engineering for some sidewalk along Broadway, and then Southeast 2nd, Ash to Date. 2028 would be in construction of Southeast Broadway, 12th to Sunny, and Southeast 2nd, and then engineering for Bade and 13th. And then 29th gets to construction of the last block of Bade and 13th up on the hill, and then engineering for areas of A Street and Tremont. And then again, what drives up the cost on this too is on these narrow streets, you're also having to acquire some strips of right of way too. So that's why we have the engineering and construction going on off even years to give time to get all that to happen. But that's essentially what you see there for that element, should it be the pleasure of the council to go that route. Next slide. Now getting back into the more traditional elements, the post office crosswalk, we got a grant for that. So that'll be on the fast track to go down next spring, and we'll see that happen. Next slide. Downtown parking lots, this is covered by the TIF district. And basically we have money to go acquire land, engineer, and build 2 parking lots. And the goal is one for South College Avenue and one for North College Avenue. And that's fully funded by TIF. Next slide. Then the traffic light for the new east-west road and College Avenue. And that would be like a 50-50 between the TIF and then the developer to make that happen. Next slide. And then the east-west road, this is again that'll be a partnership between the city and its TIF district, and then the developer and the public schools. And also an element of this through us will be the tree grant to go fund the tree and the irrigation. So teeing this up for engineering and then going to construction and then having another corridor going that way.
Mike.
Yeah.
With that involved in looking ahead.
Yeah.
And I know there's some engineering to be done and there's some still, that kind of stuff, but to be frank, there's a lot of cars for 2 roads in that east-west round on Stone Creek Lakeside Development in that area. Is there any conversation or other engineering or looking into, it's already a bottleneck just coming out of the high school alone, out of their only parking lot and on College Ave, and just at lunchtime. And then after what you'd see traditional school hours, College Ave gets backed up all along. And there's only going to be 1 road, if I see correctly, east-west road. So there's, put it this way, there's likely going to be 2 other ones, but we have nothing to do with them because again, it's about
it's about safeguarding our assets because the developers, they have responsibility as well. So the east-west road, just because some of the past work and we had exposure with it, but eventually there is going to be another north-south road connecting the east-west road of Mid-John. Basically, it'll go over Christensen Lane, which was the driveway of Craig Christensen's house, and that road essentially will have like a softer, gentler lean into the hillside, so that way the buses can actually make it down there. So that'll be another ancillary to College Avenue. But I've made sure from the get-go I have discussions really linking Lakeside with the public school district, because mainly saying like, we can't carry everything, like share the load.
Yeah, so this is just what we're being responsible for.
Yeah.
But their conversations and other maps and so on and so forth are going to address that potential.
Exactly.
Great, thank you.
Exactly. This document is us dealing with stuff where we have exposure. And then the other annexation all set a hearing for in the future, the former Bobby Smith property. There's also even discussion on that developer eventually building a subsequent additional east-west road that essentially would connect 125 to the new school. So there's going to be a lot of ways to slice and dice this.
Wonderful. Thank
Just
you.
not all of them involve us paying for it.
I understood.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yep. Next slide. Then Northeast College Place. This one is actually going to go on over a couple of years. So the portion that'll be next year will be Damson. We got a Transportation Improvement Board grant to rebuild it from Cargill up of Rose Street and include the rapid flashing beacon. That was the last portion we didn't deal with because when we did C Street, we weren't able to classify it fast enough. So they didn't allow us to do it as part of that project. Now it's classified, so we were able to get grant money. Then the other thing, I had discussions with TIB about this, is we know Walla Walla is doing their portion of the Rose Street Road diet on their side. So Transportation Improvement Board is going to be doing an out of the call grant to essentially tack on some money to our Damson project to, in essence, allow for the restriping between Cary Court and Lambert. And then there's going to be a transition with the bike route, because on the Walla Walla side, they have bike lanes. And then once you get past Lambert, it turns into that multi-use path. So that's why there's some increased cost there to safely deal with that. And then as we get into 2026, the secondary element will be getting the street lamps in there, because originally the TIB was going to fund it, but they wanted us to wrap up 4 bikes quicker. And because of supply chain, that had major issues, and we were off of getting the money on that by about 4 days, and they refused to work with us. So I believe we'll be in good footing to make that happen just in the future here. Next slide. And then the other thing, which we haven't talked about much, and there's another facility study that is going for this, is the whole public works yard. And the thing to keep in mind, and if anyone wants to tour of it, we can do that sometime, because I think it's more about out of sight, out of mind thing, because of where it's at. It's in the interior of the block between Birch Date, 4th and 6th. And a lot of those buildings predate the city being a city, where it's little shed structures and chicken coop structures that have been repurposed into workspaces. And I'll just say, when we had longer term staff here, they started here in the 70s and they were used to that. But as folks retire and you get new staff, they see that and trying to like keep them here ends up being a whole ball of wax. So we need to essentially examine what are the needs for this, and there's ways to fund this. So FEMA has grants to do this sort of work, same with Pacific Power, and then splitting it between the funds. This would be a much further out there project. I will also mention from an emergency management standpoint, it's probably not best to have the public works yard where it's currently at, because if you look at the GIS maps, the elevation is actually like a little bit of the bottom of like a fishbowl. So like if there were a flood, that's like where the water would go. So probably not the best site. So just put that out there. Next slide. Then Autumn Meadows, just dealing with that, and the LID is covering that, just getting the roads up to our standard, and then there are roads. Next slide. Then there's a lot of little projects that Public Works Director McAndrews has been dealing with that we just need to account for. So Southeast Ash, we're looking at engineers trying to evaluate what's the best to mitigate traffic, but there's just some issues at key peak times between university traffic and Davis School traffic. So trying to figure out what to do there. So we have that as a placement. Next slide. The other one is going to be a more pressing concern, and if you look, that's a car that's over a retaining wall. So Lamperty and College Avenue, what a lot of people who are going south on College and make the left turn and go too quick, over the years I've been here, there have been a lot of little incidents, none of them that bad, but of cars either hitting that wall or going over. And the thing is, you're at elevation above a subdivision. So if you're going too fast, you're going to end up right on someone's house, and you can see it end up in their backyard pretty good here. So really looking at trying to get a really good reinforced guardrail or something. So to at least try to slow it down or something, because it's an issue. Next slide. And then this is a placeholder. And I can get into some of the dynamics about this at a later meeting, because I could probably fill a meeting on this. But I'll just say, Well, I'll just say, due to some, I'll put politely, intergovernmental dynamics, in order to protect something going in on the south side of Myra Road, we may have to look at redoing one of the entrances over there. And the issue, there's a much easier way to get in for another entrance, but we don't exactly control this other way, and certain parties are, I'll just say, being difficult. So we have our commercial lands, we need to use them, and there's a higher cost going about this way, but it does give them full access. So I'm at least trying to put money in there to at least do a conceptual, and we are trying to have a lot of discussion to get other parties to change their mind and stuff. But if that is not successful, at the end of the day, we need to do what we need to do. So this is a placeholder for that. And you'll see it some years out, because again, we're hopeful dialogue could continue to change minds and we protect what wants to go in there. Next slide.
Where's your pessimism, Mike?
It's,
You're usually a pessimist and you're like, well, hopefully conversations will get going.
well, it's the private public meeting. I try to be civil. So, well, hey. So Southeast 9th, this has been in there for some time. This road is our only gravel and dirt road in the city limits. This can be funded by the Transportation Benefit District, and then showing local support. That would essentially free up some CDBG money because it's in the low income block group. So we could potentially get this thing going, which would be good.
Yeah, it's a pretty unattractive.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we put the light in there
Yeah.
recently, or about a year ago, because it was pretty dark as well.
Yeah. Next slide. So pedestrian signalization, and really this is just a split between jurisdictions, developer and state grant. And it's just that, you know, Villages has a lot of folks living in it. The park has a lot of folks in the park. So getting some sort of signal over there. And in this case, City of Walla is supportive of this one. So.
Sherry. Somebody at the door.
Oh.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Oh. Okay.
Michael, or
Yeah.
we'll break here perhaps. You know, it was interesting, that roundabout that was just put in, do I have this right? North College and Wallula Avenue intersection there.
Oh, yeah, they're
You know,
just outside,
Was that?
just outside the city.
Yeah, you know, I thought that was really interesting. The road was closed for a while and there was
Yeah.
quite a bit of work there, but it seemed to be. Yeah, okay. It seemed to me that that was sort of a roundabout light.
Yeah.
Do you agree with me? Or is
Yeah.
that kind of a,
No, I would
my
agree.
visual
Yeah.
interpretation of that? And so it was interesting because many times when we talk about roundabouts, we're talking about, you know, a crop circle in the English wheat field or something, you know, but not quite that large, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, you're dating yourself. But some of those, yeah, not as intrusive,
no,
and handling, you know, the traffic flows quite nicely, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? And so anyways, it's just surprising how those are developing over time. And it's something that, you know, when we talk about some of our intersections that we have, that we've talked about, you know, roundabouts in the past, it's maybe not the big deal where you have to buy all the houses around it and, you know, and move
Yeah,
buildings.
exactly.
You know what I'm saying? It just seems like it's not as intrusive. So
Yeah.
anyway,
the genesis of it's changed. They have
Yeah.
compact ones. now.
yeah, so that's that's kind of a good thing, I
Yeah,
think, but
for
yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
So next slide. Okay, so Whitman Drive, this one did not become much of an issue, but now it is. So back when the multi-use path was originally constructed, keep in mind Homestead didn't exist. The Martin Airfield pathway didn't exist. So people were going out there, but it just wasn't as showcased. Now you have Homestead out there, and the county built a multi-use path going all the way out to Last Chance. I bike it quite a bit. During the weekend, the amount of people who are running dogs, people, strollers, bikes, everything down the middle of the traffic lane is insane on those 2 blocks. Because otherwise it's solid multi-use path all the way from Fort Walla Walla to Whitman. It's actually pretty nice. So we actually did get a grant to pay for engineering and right-of-way acquisition for those 2 blocks. So that money will be available in 2025, and we're trying to position it for construction because we fixed this. We have a complete corridor, which, I mean, people are already making it that long. It's just it really isn't safe at the moment. Next slide. Then this one we put a placeholder in. This is on the Larch Hill, and there is an element of retaining wall, and part of it is on our right of way, and it's starting to falter. So we need to figure out how to reinforce it and essentially keep it up so it doesn't damage our roadway. The property owner has done their portion. We need to do like our portion. So that's why the placeholder is in there. Next slide. Then the Whitman Larch intersection, this one, just as we have more development, the apartments, and then the commercial side, when we deal with the issues on the east side of the property, I mean, you're going to have traffic, and that curb study that was done a couple of years ago said that that intersection, once it met warrants, would likely need a stoplight. That's what they recommended for this one. So you can see the split, so between developer curb and then city money. Then next slide. Then Whitman Drive. This is basically the portion from Academy Way over to Martin Airfield. So that portion was only half of it was redone when Haven Homes Homestead came in. And the other half dates back to County Road. So, and because you have a seam, it's like starting to fail in a lot of places. So getting a curb and gutter on the north side and then resurfacing it, it's needed. So 50% would be developer contribution, which can be triggered by Martin Airfield and finishing up Homestead. And the other half would be the grant. Next slide.
Is that something that could hold off for 4 years?
We believe so
Okay.
through crack sealing and some strategic fixes, we can do that. Now, so that to cover streets, wastewater. Now we get into that. Next slide. Wastewater improvements, we've talked with this about this ad hominem. So with this, we're going to be doing phase 1A, which is a lot of the filter improvements and things like that. So that amounts to like 5 million next year. And then we're doing the rate study and seeing where that goes. And then basically by the end of next year, figuring out, do we pipe it? Do we fix our current plant fully, things like that, and then proceed ahead and then essentially wrap up the improvements either way by 2026, because with the extent of it, that's the deadline. So how it's paid for is it's a split with ecology grant and loan. And then we also got a federal earmark as well that covers about 3.5 million of it. So that's pretty cool. Next slide. Then wastewater lift station. This is the coffee can contraption that will be fixed with a nice proper building and new line going to it, and then new sidewalk as well. Because when you get further down that street, there is no sidewalk. So Ecology generously offered to cover that, and they basically forwarded to us a financing package that covers 10 years worth of sewer line, fixing this lift station and the treatment plant. So we're dealing with it. Next slide. And then the sewer lining program, if you remember in past iterations, to try to get cost savings, we try to aggregate 2 years worth every other year, and then we would do a certain proportion. With the ecology financing offer, we're actually able to knock out the entire 10-year list of them at one time. So we actually think we're going to see a lot of cost efficiencies here because we're throwing in so much sewer lining at one time. And that's covered by that ecology package. Next.
Do you think that's going to give us an advantage for getting the crew out here? Because if I recollect the last time,
yeah,
it's like very few companies do it.
There's only like 4 companies,
right,
and you have to have a substantial amount of work for them to even want to.
Right.
So I think this will actually get more people that actually want to set up shop to get it done. So
Okay.
It should drive down the price. And then Central Avenue wastewater, this is some years out. And for now, it's holding its own, but it's an issue. This is a 2-block area that back in the day, for whatever reason, there's a private sewer line that extends for like 2 blocks that covers like a bunch of homes. Yeah, go figure. So the general concept here is, if you look back into the TBD thing, we have Central Avenue in there. So the same time we do the street, actually build the appropriate sewer underneath and abandon this thing, because we really don't. There's debates about the age of it, how many homes actually go into it. Yeah, it's interesting. So dealing with that, we definitely want to get to. Okay, next slide. Then the final part of it, the water projects next. Well 7, we're putting this on the remaining of the 5 acres we have for the Southwest Lift Station. And again, it's a split between water utilities, state earmark DOH grant, and federal appropriation. And we're trying to put all these wells in different areas of town. So that way we aren't like drawing down the water table too much, and also making sure that they have different power providers too. So like for instance, if Pacific Power is out of power, like what happened a week ago, then you have some wells on Columbia REA and the city isn't out of luck. So we're going from a system that was once all within 5 blocks of each other to where now it's in different quadrants of the city. So next slide. I mentioned a water tower. It's definitely expensive. This is the first element of it. So, and we're trying to position this for next year. So with the water tower, that'll come some years down the line, but you need a transmission main to run water in and out of it. And we want to get that transmission main done while we're doing the John Muir Road, so we aren't having to re-rip up a brand new road. Also, we want to get it through the county portion up to Owens Road, so that way we don't get hung up with permit requirements of other agencies and such multiple times. So we're teeing up this element of it for next year, but just the pipe portion. Next slide. Then this is the grant that reappeared. This is the FEMA grant from a couple years ago that they found. So next council meeting, you'll be asked to approve that, and that'll go to seismically retrofit this and repaint it. So that essentially covers 90% of the cost, and they'll be over the next 2 years. And this is a water tower from the main one from the 1940s.
Right.
Yeah.
What's the interior of that tank like? Do you guys?
Oh, interior tank, that has to get inspected every couple of years. So
It's
the interior is really good. It's just the exterior
Right.
really needs work.
right. I'm sure they were looking at it, but I was just curious what that had to be. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's programmed in. So the interior's always been good. We just need to get the exterior up at the same level. Next one. Then well number 3, getting a generator on that one. So we're working to get a FEMA HMA brick grant that would cover 75% of this work to have a generator on this one. All the new wells have the generators. This well, for whatever reason, didn't have one. So we're trying to get one on it. Next slide. Then this is going to be some years out, and you can see it's a hodgepodge of money. But the West College Place water tower, it's really expensive, but again, we're trying to make sure we don't do like what Pasco did, where you build a small one, then go oops and have to build another one. So to do 1 million gallon, and keep in mind our current one here is only 500,000 gallons. That gives you an idea as to size. It ends up being about 15 million, and we believe it'll be a split between water utility, federal earmark, trust fund, developer contribution. And then our federal lobbyists found a mechanism where you can actually slide this kind of stuff into apparently a governor actually has like another budget I wasn't aware of. So we actually submitted this to that. Yeah, there's like a pseudo budget. So yeah. So and the general idea here is to put it on the grounds of the treatment plant. It's just taking some additional time to plan because we're working through requirements with the FAA because it's close to Martin Airfield. So we're working through that. Next slide. Then the water plan did the high priority water main program. So we're systematic about it. So dealing with some line issues on Southwest 4th and 5th. And then as we get into 26, fixing the line on Southeast 6th from College of Date. and then some work at Southeast 8th and Elm. And right now we have it with the water utility, but this kind of program, you're actually able to get some DOH money for this easily. So we likely can sub some of this in. Then the next slide. Then this one, again, going back to why our prioritization system is important, is medium. So this is as money is available, where the line is roughing it out for now, but definitely needs to be changed out. And we have some lines up at Lambert between Rose and C, Southwest 8th, and then also a little pocket in Country Estates that needs to be changed out. And that's funded, and this is all in the water system plan that was adopted about a year ago. And then the last page is the table of acronyms, and that is the booklet.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but wait, there's more. Oh, look how nice he is. Any questions or comments on this? No. Back on page 10. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
You know, it is a lot of stuff, and, you know, we kid, but it really does feel like we're looking and we're talking about the city of the future, right? I can almost picture what some of these things are going to look like, and how, you know, the clean lines of the sidewalks and the trees and the parks. And it's actually, it really is exciting to be able to kind of think of those types of things when we look at it that way.
That's a really good point. You know, I was talking to somebody, the audacity of some of our churches in the valley, the discussions that probably went into place. What size should we build it, you know? And I was just thinking when Mike was talking about the water tower, I don't know if this is before your comment right now, Mayor, but the debate that probably surrounded, you know, we probably only need about 100,000 gallon tank, you know, right? And let's just, or whatever, you know? And so the debate that probably surrounded that, and the financing or whatever they came up to, the ability to do that. And all these years later, how it is still giving and benefiting the community. So yeah, into the future, you're right. Yeah.
Does this stuff get to potential businesses and such who are kind of like recording?
Yes, I mean, that's part of the reason why I do this, because I will say, if you go back in time, like probably like 20 years or so, in general in the past, there wasn't this much like planning going on in the far past. And there was a hesitancy by the development community where it's like, hey, if we're bringing this investment, do we do this, for example, when they're down to like a well and a half or something where water isn't a guarantee? So, I mean, since we've been doing this investment, we've been showcasing that, show now it's safe to be investing money here.
That's fantastic. Thank you all.
You made me think of something. When you just said that. So a million gallon, right? So if you lost a well, what is a million gallons buy you as far as time? I know that's probably a question you may not know the answer to, but in other words, you obviously pump it full of water.
Well, I mean, I can tell you because of the incident we almost had happen last. I don't know if people remember this, but we had a power surge and an outage, and our SCADA system wasn't like calling for water to fill our tower. And luckily, our public works staff scrambled and got it before it really caused a calamity. But it happened on a weekend, and what we learned through that process is that our current tank can basically store about like, I'd say is that one tank in general does like about like 24 hours of water storage. And then the two tanks over on Maple are about half that size. So together they equal it. So you have about 48 hours. So if we get, and the state recommends you have 72 hours. So if we get this other tank online, as it stands now, it would be around 96. I'll say 72, mainly because it's predicated on us having more homes and stuff, so there'll be more demand. So I'd say 72.
Wow, that's short.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Well,
So that's why the wells are so, obvious. I mean, obviously, but
yeah, that's why when there's questions about, hey, why are you building another water tower? Hey, yes, well, why are you doing another one? That's the exact reason, because when we had that situation last year, that got very close.
So Mike, do the well pumps feed directly into the drinking water? I mean, they pressurize the system.
Yeah.
But then you also have tanks that are gravity fed. And so it's a combination. Now you guys are monitoring that. This is probably never, but so you've got pressure from electrical motors that are putting water into the system, but you also have a water tower that's up 100 feet or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's that whole combination that's supplying pressure and it's the monitoring of that and okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't realize it was that short.
Yeah.
Mike, before you go on to the next, did you see my text?
No.
It's on your personal. There's an oil spill on Highland.
Ooh.
And it's pretty big. We're pretty sure the Basin Disposal
Yeah.
truck, we've got some footage, but it's a pretty big oil slick. And it goes all around the corner to Highland. I'm not sure
Yeah.
how urgent it is to get somebody out there or something, because
See if that.
it's covering the whole street there.
Yeah.
It's probably hydraulic. fluid.
Okay. Yeah. Looking at that, I would say probably.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty big.
Okay.
Sorry. Mike,
My husband texted it to me a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, he says people are putting cat litter out there. So, okay, when you finish with that,
Okay. Let me call Robert.
isn't Robert on vacation?
Well, he's going in a training, but
Oh, I thought he was in Hawaii.
no, he's back.
Okay, so we're gonna just take a short break,
Yeah, like 3.
3-minute break, in case anybody needs to take care of it.
Fourth. So it's around the corner from, actually on the east side of my house. Yeah, there's a pretty big.
What's better?
It was a Basin Disposal truck, and we have ring footage, and we can actually see that it's very likely that it's spraying out. But. Good thing. You know, it's just really, and then it keeps on going, it goes all the way around my leg. So he was thinking that fluid all the way, he didn't see it. I'd be surprised if he didn't see it. Look at that.
Much it would stop.
Yeah.
It would stop working.
I even told my husband, check the video, see if you see a tow truck coming by. Pick it up. Okay.
Hey, well, we went to-
I didn't want to interrupt you earlier, but we still have lots to go. I
Yeah.
don't know how dangerous having that
No, that's
going into our stormwater and everything.
yeah. Geez.
Going to the cars, yeah. It's a big one. We've got some ring footage that Aaron sent me. It's kind of hard to see, but you can kind of see when it sprays. It was definitely the biggest spoil truck.
Wow.
Neighbor like to Aaron text.
We'll just wait a few minutes for everybody to come back and then we'll.
Yeah.
On a change of subject, why do I?
Whoever set up like iPads with having that city map and the city college place on the website and all that stuff, it's looking great.
I use it all the time too. I'm looking at it because when Mike says a street name and I don't
Yeah.
see it, I'm pulling up the city map.
Already there.
Yeah.
I'm sure you use the website. City, website, is it user friendly?
It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
Thanks. I'll also say the pace that we now have a full-time IT analyst to finally do all of this.
Yeah. I would say like,
Okay, I think we're all back. Thank you very much. All right, Mike, thank you. Next, we're going to go on to the 2024-2029 equipment replacement plan.
Laid it out from this year is that due to supply chain issues, several things were on order and then are still just floating out. So a lot of it carries over. And then you'll see status count budget means it will occur, budget delayed. Again, we couch that in case we're maybe not as immediate, but if we have the funds, we'll deal with it. And then planned means that it's planned for the future, or if we get a grant or something that covers things. But for equipment, with the exception of really the only equipment you can get grants for the most part is storm equipment for a stormwater system. Everything else you're primarily on your own with. Next slide. This just deals with a summary of the investments so far, replacing the brush truck, which was fairly old, turnout replacement, the police car rotation, radar trailer, a lawnmower that actually is a professional one, so we can get more done without having more people. And then going back to my stormwater comment, replacing a jether and a box van, and that had some elements of storm grants in there. Then replacing a pickup, and then the equipment portion of our Jacobs contract. Next slide. This gives you a flavor of where a lot of the investments are at in this function. Really, two departments that are heavy in here is police and fire. Police ends up being 25%, fire 20%, and streets is just below that, 19%. And then you'll see in the 6-year projection, police and fire hold true at 25% respectively, and then a smorgasbord outside of that. Next slide. This is the split for this upcoming year. So there's investments in equipment on the admin ComDev side, fire department and police, parks. We got through last year with the new investments, so we're good there. Same with the storm. But then there's some proposed investments in street, the annual wastewater equipment contract, and water. Next slide. Then we have the 6-year outlay. This is held steady, typically just over 6 million if you look at past ones for the outlay. Next slide. Then the prioritization, again, to give us the wiggle room, depending on where revenues are at. The high means we need it because otherwise it's endangering folks. Medium is as our capacity allows, and then low means that unless we get a grant or some outside funding, it's gonna wait a bit. Next slide. Now we get into equipment replacements. Next. Admin. So as part of the city hall work that's proposed here next year, this building needs a newer generator. The current one is toast, and when it was here, it ironically only like supported like 2 outlets here, which I mean for a main like emergency building, that's not good. So the concept here is, as we're doing the city hall work, replace it with an appropriate generator. And then as we get into 2026, switch out some of the replace the vehicles and admin. And you'll see what the 6-year outlay is there, $410,000, with the majority being the generator. Next slide. The fire department, with that, it's replacing the turnouts. Then the ambulances are expensive. So we're trying to get in line for one next year. But yeah, it's definitely competitive. Then in 2026, replacing a pickup and adding a new ambulance. And that's been in this plan for a while, so just following as it has been. And then 2028, the other brush truck, and then replacing the trailer. So the 6-year estimated outlay there is north of 1.5 mil. Next slide. Police department. So finishing up the taser replacement payments, and then the cost of the leases. And then what you're going to see in the subsequent years is adding an aggregate vehicle for some new officers that are being proposed. And the issue there, which is why we're going to take a close examination of this, is that leasing made all sense in the world when supply chain was rosy and we actually got our equipment. That is no longer the case. Like the current batch of the cars that we should have had already, they're slowly trickling in, but we don't have our full order, and we're in dialogues with them about like, hey, that shouldn't be coming against us because you didn't deliver it. So the behavior of the company it's doing that, and just the time frame, I would say, as we went through COVID and in this current environment, has gone from where they were doing awesome work, turning it around quickly, to where now there's delays in supply chain, and definitely leaving some to be desired. So we're going to take a close examination of this to determine what to do. So with some of the new positions, we just have been placeholders for just outright buying vehicles the city owns, and we're going to take stock of essentially what to do if there's either other providers that do similar stuff, they have guarantees as to turn around, or if this is a macro level issue where we just need to be going back and purchasing our own vehicles. Whatever this is something that has come out since COVID, and we thought it was going to come back to normal, but it hasn't.
So they're charging us for time that we don't have our vehicles?
Exactly. And that's what the current conversation is about. Because again, they're supposed to get it here. And if they aren't getting it here, whose fault is that? I mean, they can say supply chain, but I would argue it's their fault. So
yeah, it still falls on them.
It's not a bad idea, Mike, to diversify the whole cycle of vehicles so that we're not, we talked about this, but that to not have everything leased, just put a few purchases in there probably. We obviously diversifies the risk, I would say, perhaps. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's why you see a little bit of a different flavor here compared to other years. And then going really far out in the outlay, you'll see replacement of the chief's car and the detective's car. So the estimated outlay there for 6 years is about just north of 1.5 mil. Now we get into public works. Next slide. For Parks Division, they have one more lawnmower that needs to be replaced. We think for some of the smaller areas, like a smaller one, so 30,000 in 2026, and then a replacement trailer. So outlay there isn't much, 60,000 over 6 years. Next slide. Then in stormwater, replacing a pickup, 55,000 at Rother trailer at 175. So the outlay there is 230,000 over 6 years.
What's a Rother?
That's essentially a piece of equipment that they can go through and like essentially clean out the storm sewers when it gets like filled with junk. So next slide. Then the streets, a lot of stuff in here. So replacing utility trucks. And then the key thing you're seeing that we're trying to strive for is improving the snow response. So we're actually working toward getting winter de-icer equipment to start spraying the de-icer and stuff, because we do not have that capacity. So essentially that would add that capacity, and we would be able to pre-treat some of our main streets. And then with a lot of this newer equipment we're getting, we're also trying to make sure it can easily have plow attachments. So we can really step up our game with fixing up these streets and making sure streets stay passable. 2025, you'll see replacement bucket truck. 2026 is air compressor, and then replacing a roller. And that's important because as we're starting to stabilize our public works staff, we would like to examine the ability of potentially on smaller projects, bring back the ability to do some smaller spot paving in-house. We've had a really archaic roller that hasn't really worked for a while. So now looking at replacing that. 2027, tilt trailer and replacing the tractor. 2028 would be replacing the paint sprayer, and then 2029 would be replacing a dump truck and going along that line. Next slide. Wastewater division makes it very straightforward. We have that in our master contract with them, and because there were some inflation protections in there, it makes it pretty cost effective, especially for how expensive the equipment is. So because otherwise we'd be taking major hits just trying to get newer equipment, but it's all on them. So that makes it very nice. Next slide. And then water, just replacing some utility truck, adding a pickup because there is proposal to have a utility worker due to the amount of work going on in public works and some retirements. And then 2027, replacing a backhoe. So the estimate there is 250,000 outlay over 6 years. And with that, that is the draft plan as it stands. Questions?
Questions or comments?
Only the comment of thank you in my head when you're starting to begin was about the de-icer or the snow, and you first thing you said. So yeah, thank you.
I also want to thank you, as funny as it sounds, for the pictures, because it helps me see exactly what you're talking about.
Yep.
I appreciate them. Councilmember Espinosa, any questions or comments?
Yeah, quick question, Mike. So as I look at the cost of some of the vehicles to get them replaced, it's pretty pricey, specifically for police. My question would be, are you guys looking at several vendors to get the highest and best return for our dollars to make the best use of our taxpayer funds, to get those vehicles for our officers and at the best possible price?
Yes. So even when we did the leasing program initially, we looked at like 3 other vendors that essentially dealt with that kind of stuff. And that was the lowest cost one. And then when we outright get the equipment, essentially our fleet maintenance mechanic, he looks at all the various co-op purchasing agencies we're in to aggregate the values and see what's the lowest cost we can get. Even so far as if there's even used equipment that remotely fits our benchmark that's lightly used, we will do that. In fact, what's saved us money on the ambulance utility is out of the gate. We essentially had used ones that we got from Burbank and Dayton. However, I will say with some of the more specialized equipment, the supply chain issue on ambulances is so extremely tight right now that when we can locate one, we're going back to that item you approved the past meeting where it's like when we find it, if it's in this approved plan, we act on it. It's because there on the core items, there is still exhaustion on it where if you find it, you just have to grab it or you're out of the luck. So we do exhaustive research and if we can get it low cost or get it gently used, we do that. But on some of these really specific items, it's just trying to locate it.
And a follow-up question is it more feasible economically speaking to lease police vehicles than to buy for the city?
Well, here's the thing that my answer on that's going to be a mixed bag. At the time we did it, it was because we were getting cars very timely. They were outfitting them, and they still need to outfit them even under current contract, but they were doing it really quick and we could depend on them. And we were saving a lot of money because, with when you buy a vehicle, we're having to maintain that ourselves. And I would say, especially back then, it was a way bigger issue because for many years we had a fleet maintenance department of 1. So, you try to stick 60 vehicles of one person, good luck. So with the lease vehicles, they end up covering some of that maintenance too. So that provided some assistance to fleet. However, now that we're encountering this issue about them getting here, period, that's why we're going to re-examine it because I just think on that concept, COVID potentially has done a number on it and we're trying to ascertain, is it that one provider or is this just the way the business is now where it just doesn't work anymore because the supply chain is so crazy? And we're going to find out that question.
Glad you guys are looking at that question. Thank you.
Councilmember Peterson.
Mike, this is for Brian also. This is something maybe by the time we get to the end of this budget cycle in December or something. So this is really low priority, but we have a debt schedule. We've got bond issues that are, correct me if I'm wrong here, bond issues that are being funded primarily by property tax. But we also have outstanding loans.
Yeah.
And I know, I believe the loans show up, Brian, on your individual, funds perhaps. Is there a summary of those anywhere, or is that going to be kind of a pain to get? And the only reason I'm asking that, I think it is interesting. Sometimes we'll see a huge project, and we are getting 90% of it off of a grant, and we're getting whatever, and then it's really rare. But then sometimes we have to pick up the tab or it's been a long time. Either we just paid out of operating or whatnot. But I'm thinking it would be nice. Sometimes as far as a council member, I lose track sometimes of what we have outstanding at a bank or something like that. That's a loan. And I know it's not a lot, but it would be kind of refreshing to see what that looks like. I think, once again, low priority and I think it's just a threshold of how, I guess, what is our ability to borrow more? I think we've gone through, I think there's with bond issues, there are structures there. What do you think, Mike? Is that something that we could?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have to turn in those schedules as far as the annual report anyway. So,
yeah, we provide a liabilities report to the state.
Okay.
at the end of each year. So that document is already exists.
So it's okay. So it's not a lot of work. I don't want to burden you. I really, but that is the state wanting to know how much debt we've taken on, or is that more just a detail of what our liability section of our balance
Part of
sheet?
the audit to make sure you're showing what all your liabilities are.
Got it.
Although we're a cash-based city
Right.
and we don't have a balance sheet, so you don't readily see it.
That's a good point.
So we do have that debt schedule. It's called a Schedule 9.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And I have that. It includes all leases and loans.
Because as we've gone, thank you. As we've gone through
And
the
it
large
forecasts
capital
out
items,
what the debt payments are
Yeah.
over the next 20 years.
I think you probably have shown that to us too. I'm sure you have, but
Actually, I'm not sure if I.
anyway, if we could look at that just as a refresher,
Yeah, I can-
maybe, I would
I can
appreciate
include
that.
it in the budget.
Yeah. Because we've talked about some large dollar capital items and then now we're into these, leases that we've got obligations for. And it's just, anyway, it'd be not a big deal, but I'd like to see it if we can.
Yeah.
But,
We'll do.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to note as we're dealing with debt here is that especially I would say on your current expense items, you're having to very carefully watch what your councilmanic debt limit is, which we're always watching. And that's why we haircutted the TIF district to provide us a handicap. With the utilities, it's essentially making sure when you're doing the projection that your rates are covering the debt payments. So that the rates cover debt payments. And the other element too is that when you're working through a lot of these state grants and loans, where when you're getting it like with ecology, for instance, and Department of Health, they'll say, oh, well, 50% is like a forgivable loan. While you're working through that, it initially is showing up in total as a loan. And then when you close it out, you're getting, you essentially then can classify it as, hey, it's the half as a grant. So when you're working through the process, there's a weird middle period where it looks like it's a significant loan, but it actually isn't. And it's because of goofy state requirements.
Yeah, that'd be useful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, let's move on to the draft fiscal year 2024, 2029 information technology plan.
Okay, thank you. This item, 6-year plan, same general concept as we've gone over with the other two, except with information technology. Next page. This just goes over everyone had a hand in creating it. And I'll say compared to past years, this is a lot more honed in now since we actually have a staff person now that can deal with this. It's not all of us trying to duct tape it together. Next slide's the table of contents. Next. This is just the methodology of things. And then also just dealing with where we have been and where we're going. Just up until midway last year, we worked with IMESD for years. They cut ties with all the municipal clients. And then we're in the current setup where Price Computers does backup, but then our full-time IT analyst, John Anthus, does day-to-day stuff and is doing a great job covering everything and making sure things get fixed very timely. The thing we have to be cognizant of is due to a lot of the corporate buyouts. Costs have changed over time because you have a big fish buy a little fish, then cost goes up. So luckily this is starting. We saw a blip this year. It's starting to go down a bit because of moving a Tyler, and then after next year, further getting rid of our legacy systems, and then it'll get back to, I would say, where historically it's been. Next slide. This just lists some basic principles for when we're utilizing software across the organization. Next slide. Existing environment, we do Dell environment here. We're on a 7-year schedule, and we've done more and more trying to move toward cloud technology because of the additional security it has. And then just if you have an earthquake or stuff blows up, your data's in multiple places safe, but it's stored in enough servers where it's in little bits where there's a lot more data protection. So one of the things we're going to have to do is change out the server here at City Hall because talk about time going by fast. We got the server change. We got the server change when I first started here, and I didn't realize I'd been here 7 years already. So, it turns out the maintenance window is toast on it now. Where if like something happens, you have to try and figure it out. So that's a major liability because if it's under 7 years, then it's covered by the Dell support. So we need to change that out now. Software on the local server mainly is Esri, Firehouse, and then that NetMotion the police uses, and then we use for authentication across the organization. Over time, we moved a lot more things over to the cloud environment. Our Microsoft Office is finally in the cloud, luckily, and then a lot of our other softwares are there as well. The big project this year, and it'll continue next year, is moving everything over to Tyler, which when it's all done is going to be really nice, but it's just trudging along through this, and thanks to the finance department and everyone, because it's a lot of work and we don't have a ton of staff here. So on top of everything else, it makes things a pain. But once we get over that, we'll be switching off those legacy systems, and then it'll be incorporated in the umbrella. Next slide. So this is a little history on where things have been. So and this goes back to like 18 when we started getting normalizing, replacing computers before they completely break down, and actually getting software needs. 2023 was the highest blip. And that was due in large part to, when you're moving to a big system like Tyler, it's not like you just turn off the systems you're using and then magically you're using Tyler. There's a period where you're having duplicity as you're getting Tyler up to snuff and you're keeping the legacy systems going. So you're seeing that that's slowly tapering off. So we eclipsed the highest amount of spending for IT this fiscal year, but next fiscal year it drops down, and then it continues to stay in between 300 and 400,000, which if you look at similar size organizations, that tends to be par for the course. So the blip is mainly because we're moving large ERP systems. Next slide. Then the fiscal year 2023 completed projects, you can see a lot of stuff. So keeping computers on the replacement schedule, replacing a copier, and then really where we're at on a lot of stuff is just the software maintenance on everything, because we've essentially acquired the software to do our jobs, and it's like maintaining it and then making sure with Tyler that we get that up and fully incorporated, so that way when we do leave the legacy systems, nothing is hanging. Next slide. Now we're getting into the expenses of everything. With IT, since a lot of that ends up being buried in admin and finance, because finance is providing utility billing for the utilities and running a budget and things like that, you'll see a lot of the software expense for the organization is buried in there. So 291,000 of the 480 is in there. And then the rest is divvied out between community development, fire, police, and public works, aggregate about 480,000, 100,000 less than this year. So again, it's declining because we've made the appropriate investment. Next slide. Then you'll see the 6-year total ends up being about 2.3 million across the organization. Largest share is in the admin and finance, since they support a lot of the other functions of the city. Next slide. And then prioritization, again, high, medium, and low. So high ends up being stuff we really need for city or operations. Medium is really if it just makes things quicker and yields efficiencies. And then low is if we have money left over and we're able to fit it in or not. Next slide. Then we get into departmental projects. Next slide. Admin, continuing with the computer replacement plan. Again, we're trudging through the onboarding of Tyler. And when it's all said and done, Tyler is going to end up covering the finance, the utility billing, community development, including permitting. Because honestly, the setup as it stood, I viewed as a liability because our permitting was through Bias. And we were the only city Bias was doing permitting for, and Bias got bought up by Springbrook. So not much of a motive to keep that going. So I think that'll be a lot safer. And then moving asset management into Tyler as well, because they have a very affordable portal for that. Board Docs Pro, move into that functionality because that'll essentially allow an easier agenda build routing process and then allow the voting through the iPads here, which will be neat. And then replace the City Hall server, as I said, because we're now outside that warranty window. Staffing, we have our analysts, we have the Price Computers contract. And again, we're seeing some savings there because we aren't having to use them as much, near as much, because we have an IT analyst in-house. And then we're actually turning out stuff quicker because we have someone doing that, which is nice. AWC, we have a lower tier, the GIS consortium, just because we had an earlier grant that cleaned up the data. So it's good to have for emergency projects, but we aren't needing them constantly like we used to. And then we have those Wi-Fi community hubs that people use at the parks and the municipal campus, the free Wi-Fi that gets a lot of use. Next slide. This is the various links for all software if you're so interested in that. Next slide. Then community development, Bluebeam, we use that basically paperless building plan markup and things of that sort. So we have maintenance there. Tyler ERP, we're onboarding for community development, for permitting and plan review and all that. So that's in process. And then we have software maintenance for Azavar. They run a local gov program to cover short-term vacation rental registration. And then SurveyMonkey we use to do surveys. So that's fairly common. Next slide. And then fire department, again, computer replacement plan, same pattern. Firehouse maintenance, that's now is $12,000 annual because they got bought out by a bigger company. And then the state mandates this specialized software for reporting as well at $2,000 annually. Next slide. Police department, the body cameras, we have the annual cost there. That's definitely been a big help, I think, toward having the public faith in the police department, and also for officers, they have faith as well, because, there's data for when there's complaints and stuff where it can be easily reviewed, and it's no longer he said, she said thing, there's data. Then the security lines cameras, we program this money in the IT plan. However, every camera we bought, by and large, we've gotten Wild Horse Casino grant money for since I've been here. So we're still in the process of getting the ones up at Home Depot and Walmart installed. A lot of complicated factors there, but it's getting done. 2024 would be putting the camera at Whitman and Academy Way. That's very high trafficked intersection. And then 2026 will be Northeast these rows. And then 2028 would be larger and 12, trying to get these basically at all the entrances in a town. And then the police department, they have these rugged laptops, and those are now over 7 years and need to be replaced. So there's a large expense there for that for the tough books. And then the NetMotion, and that we use it across the organization now for authentication, but it's needed because police departments need that for the state accreditation. Next slide. Then the Public Works Department, same 7-year replacement schedule. The asset management system, the onboarding was about 26,000, but then the maintenance on that compared to other asset management systems, that's really nothing in the scheme of things. And then we have software maintenance on the backflow software, and then the GIS, which we use for utility systems. And with that, that is that.
All right, questions or comments? None. Councilmember Espinosa, any questions or comments?
Yes, my quick question. Express bill pay, that was $15,000.
Yeah.
In the previous year. We moved to a new platform of utility payments. Is there gonna be a savings realized, or is the cost increasing or staying about the same?
I would say eventually there'll be a cost savings. It's just when you're phasing out these legacy systems, you essentially have a little bit of overlap. So there will be a payment to make sure we get the appropriate data and such, but over time there will be a savings because we aren't having to have all these like separate softwares anymore. And you can actually see that on that historical expenditure graph that it starts to drop pretty substantially.
Gotcha, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, Mike, we're down to the last one. Draft community center floor plan and schematics.
Okay, so Sherry, if you could click on the first document, which is the floor plan. So with this in general, there was a time where I was frankly thinking, oh yeah, that'll happen. But through the federal earmark process and then through additional partnerships, it's now appearing that it's not as far off as we once thought. So the current building is from the late 60s. Going through Alliance Park grant process, we actually had to go through a really long process to get it recognized that we had the ability to have a building there because about 40 years after the fact, they actually have people that check on sites they gave money to from decades ago, and the inspector for RCO came to us and was like, oh, well, we never signed off on a building over here when we gave you money in 1969. So we went through a 3-year process, and given the fact that it was that long of a process, we made sure that there was a carve out where a footprint of a newer building could eventually go that it wouldn't be considered part of the protective park. So we did that work early on to make sure we didn't end up in the same predicament. So fast forward, it turns out that we had the earmark through Cantwell, and then there started being additional requests for other things because farmers market vendors, if they want to go to a commercial kitchen and cook, they have to go out to Dayton. So the concept was, hey, if we're going to have this thing at Lions Park, could that be put on the first floor? And you'll see in the plan right now it's very skeletal because as we put this money together, we'll get more detailed. But the first floor has a couple of things, as you see there, replacement of the community room as it stands, a little bit of outdoor patio, storage space, and then classrooms, because the common need in the community has been the whole childcare, and there's a state-sponsored childcare called Community Minded Enterprises that has been looking for space for a while in the valley, and they have the ability to chase after what's called an ELF grant to pay for their portion. So the classrooms are for that, and then if you go to the next page, through discussions, because I've always taken a little personally since I was here when the whole library vote passed that, they said they'd have the temporary facility at Meadowbrook, but I think they definitely gave the impression of voter that there was a permanent facility gonna happen. And I would say as the years went on and they changed directors, the general attitude was maybe. So we started having discussions with them about, okay, well, because of the Tushy issue, we know you don't have the money in the aggregate to build what you wanted to on College Avenue, but what if you came in as a partner on this and then essentially joined up with this building, and been working with their new director, Anna Romero, who is great to work with on this, and went through the board and they approved essentially being a partner on this as long as they get the near the square footage it's in this draft. And this second floor was in partnership with their staff figuring out what their permanent need is. And again, they have money that they've been putting away towards this, although it was based on the old value, not the new one with the inflation. But I would just say you put together the earmark, this ELF grant thing that could come out of the childcare, the library money, and then some additional earmarks, and then now you're cooking. So I want to put this in front of you where, this is early conceptual level work, but a lot of thought has gone into it. But before we start trying to negotiate MOUs and agreements, in concept, are you all good with it? General thoughts, because we started to really have discussions with this after it looked like the earmark was going to go through, and then we found out about that ELF grant. This has been run through Park Board, and they continue to work on it as the iterations come out. And in general, they've expressed support on this, but this has been cobbled together over the last couple of months.
Kind of came all of a sudden, huh?
Yeah.
After all this time of planning.
Basically what caused this was a combination of the congressional directed spending, so the earmarks, then the ELF grant, because we've heard about the child care forever, and then really the whole library thing, because again, when that went before the voters, the general impression was that there was going to be a permanent branch, and it wasn't going to be forever in a shopping plaza. So
Right. All right, Councilmember Jessup.
The concept is just fantastic. There's a lot going on here. So I understand it's a bottom floor thing. So thank you for that. So I've been asked about this. And so I just kind of wanted to clarify a couple of things, whatever we can at this point. So the bottom floor is all public access then. So the public access would be to the classroom childcare, but the childcare would be utilized for those who are library.
It would the child care would be utilized for essentially like city residents, because there's like a rubric list of like those that need to be like served by the essentially the state, if you will. And it's a nonprofit that does child care all over the state of Washington. And you'll see the child care portion, there's like separate doorway to it where it's like separate from the rest of the building.
Great. That's the next question. If somebody would ask about this, the entry and exit for childcare classrooms is different than the public access.
Yeah.
Okay. And then that's awesome. And then also the public access to like the kitchen and the community room is all going to be kind of, in generally speaking, open and available for really anybody, but everybody has access to the kitchen too?
Essentially, I believe that we would need to schedule that, and that could essentially go through multiple ways. We could either do an interlocal with the rural library district, or maybe we kick in for part of one of their positions and they help us continue as is with the Lions Club and they get some money from it. I mean, there's a lot of ways to slice and dice it.
And there's a separate access to the library upstairs, or do you have to go through the bottom floor?
Yeah, there's elevator and stairs, and there's a separate access for that as well.
So then the last question I have for you is obviously it's fantastic because everybody's trying to get a piece of pie. Everybody's trying to utilize and serve the community through this, which is obviously awesome.
Yeah.
Once it's all said and done, willing that we get it all you guys get it all figured out. You guys get it all figured out. It's built, so on and so forth, end of the road, done.
Yeah.
At that point, how many cooks are in the kitchen?
I mean, that element of, are you saying as far as like ownership of the store?
Ownership,
Yeah.
responsibility, control
Yeah.
is lack of a better word.
Yeah, so I mean, the general concept is it stands out as if this comes together, basically a master like MOU lease agreement with the library district, with community-minded enterprises for operation and maintenance, and essentially pooling money together, but we would outright own the building as we do now. Because I get questions about that a lot, where you think the Lions Club owns that building. They don't. We actually do. It's a lease with them.
So we'd lease with them and
Yeah.
then they work out
Yeah,
everything else.
yeah.
Awesome.
Kitchen looks small.
Well, that has been a discussion at Economic Development Commission. What I will say is the thing is, when you're going after these grants, we basically just whip this thing out to get an ELF grant. So Economic Development Commission said the same thing. So I do believe that's going to have to be enlarged, which will cut down some of the community room space. But I mean, there's a lot of usage for that. So I think it's a trade-off.
At the last farmer's market, the Blue Zone, have the kitchen display. Yeah, mine races.
Yeah.
I was going to suggest that the kitchen's rather small as well, but if you look across the room, the community storage, I wonder if that space could be configured for to be a larger kitchen, and maybe you could extend the previous kitchen out just a little bit to accommodate some more storage, and then you wouldn't be quite so impacted.
Yeah, I mean, potentially. Luckily, when we went to the state to carve out the little square to have the ability of the building, just because I didn't want to have to ever do that again, I requested they essentially cut out like about 12,000 square feet just to cover our bases. So we do have the ability to expand. I will say the storage is important, because keep in mind, with the Lions Park project that we're doing next year, is it stands right now, farmers market and a lot of functions dump stuff in that little storage cubby thing by the softball field, and that's coming down for the new multi-use field. So eventually, I mean, we're working through the motions, but storage is a premium at the city. So
Councilmember Espinosa.
Yeah, I'll wait my turn after, if the other council members are done, I have a comment on it. So my comment, Mike, is, I think it's a very ambitious project, and just my gut feeling tells me that I would not be inclined to supporting it, because I think it'd be too much going on. I would be inclined to supporting two initiatives, like a library and a community building, but to have a daycare type of facility, a community building, and a library, I think would be too much and would lend itself for a lot of conflicts between the three operations. And I say this because I know that running a daycare requires a lot of security and safety protocols, and the space is limited. As I look at this planogram, it just feels that community room is going to be quite small. And I know that the actual footprint is not that big, but I think is appropriate for our community. And so on top of that, a library, I just get the feeling that it would be too much for what we're trying to accomplish. And it's going to defeat the original purpose of having a place for our community to meet, to have a good sized kitchen for events and other things. So just a thought.
Councilmember Jessup.
Yeah, it's totally understood that we're in the bottom
Yeah.
beginning of this, so
Yeah.
please. a couple of thoughts that just went through my head. One, I'm just thinking, gosh, last I checked, there's 144, 150 homeschool families in the valley and almost ever increasing. And being that the fact this is public access and the fact that it could be rented and so on and so forth, my mind goes straight to there just from inner circles and such. The idea of the storage, is it something that's conceivable in order to increase the capacity of the building? Thinking about a separate storage facility if we're doing this thing.
Yeah.
Right. And again, I know we're talking money later, but I don't know how that would work in these conceptions. If we're already doing this, we already have the Kiwanis Park going, we already have all this going. Just having a separate storage facility specifically for farmers market or any of that type of stuff in order to alleviate or to make more room in this building. The other question I had too is, what is the footprint of this in comparison to what the current building is?
So the current building as it stands is roughly around 5,000 square feet or so. And this as proposed, including like phasing the outdoor patio and stuff, would be 6,700 square feet. So it would be roughly about 1,700 square feet bigger.
But what does that include, the upstairs and downstairs? Because
no, that number I gave you is just like if you looked at the first floor.
That's awesome. So so it's a little bigger than what's currently in there now, which is utilized for various things, art classes and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And to Councilmember Espinoza's point too, with the childcare and that kind of stuff, I know this is something that we have to just as at the school system.
Yeah.
When we have life skills classes, those who are, challenged, that I agree with that sentiment. And this is why I'm glad you put up the separate entrances and such.
Yeah.
But I imagine that looking to the school systems of how they stay compliant and more importantly, safe when it comes to that kind of separation between the public and those who are vulnerable, I think that could be remedied and compliant with this. But again, I go back to that idea or concept of perhaps if we're doing this thing with the whole park, might as well think about a different storage facility to open up this space. In my personal opinion.
I have a few questions. As far as the child care facility, is it going to be open to all incomes, or do they have to be a certain income level to meet the state?
Essentially, it would be all incomes and sliding scale, although they do prioritize like lower income, but it's open to all. And apparently this is like a statewide thing because they actually approached our lobbyists because I guess they also use him as a lobbyist and they're just doing this all across the state. So
okay. So my second question is, we are pretty much just providing the space. All the security and details is going to be the responsibility of the daycare themselves.
Exactly. And the thing I want to know with this draft schematic that came up is we actually had this architect talk through this with the community-minded enterprise people and the state person for this region that actually licenses those things. And this is what essentially they came up with to essentially check all the boxes. So.
Okay. And then I think my last question is, when we rent out the community rooms or the kitchen or the classrooms, is there going to be a fee?
I mean, that's something we could figure out. I mean, for operation and maintenance, I would recommend.
Yeah.
I mean, right now, the way the current one stands, the Lions Club does all that, and then it goes back into park maintenance, just basically because of the condition of it and things like that. But I think if this thing does come to fruition, that definitely needs re-examination.
Sure. Yeah, because we could think about possibly hiring we have a facilities personnel, correct?
We have a facilities maintenance person.
Okay, so, we could think
Yeah.
about a part-time facility,
Yeah.
somebody who's responsible for renting and keeping track of that, and maybe even taking any complaints or whatever, the light bulbs are out, whatever, kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's still early again, but I'm
Yeah.
just throwing those out for ideas because I think minimal fees would be helpful for maintenance
Yeah.
and plus I think, if we charge, let's say we charge somebody a deposit, they're going to be more apt to take care of it, right? To get that deposit back. So kind of thing. So, and then lastly, no, I guess I do have another. The library is not going to be paying any type of rent because they're paying to help build the facility.
They would be paying for it, but then they will also have the discussions with them have been like a proportional share of the operation and maintenance because there is that sunk cost. I mean, they'd have that if they did their own building. So
Would the daycare be paying rent?
that would be the concept too.
Okay, those are all my questions. Thank you. Any other questions or comments for anyone? Councilmember Cleveland?
In design, I hope you guys prioritize a lot of insulation, soundproofing
Yeah.
between the different areas.
Well, I mean, if this were to go to fruition naturally, that would be in there. This draft schematic is the stuff you need to even have those discussions with the earmark people. So.
Well, yeah, and remembering that we saw the outside rendering of the outside, it was quite attractive and
Yeah.
Frank Lloyd, right?
Yeah.
thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions or comments regarding the, what are we calling it? The community center, sorry. Okay, all right. All right. If not, is there any other business for good of the order? Councilmember Peterson?
Just late, I apologize. We all want to go. So at our last council meeting, there was a gentleman that came, the public comment about, just for our consideration, I think it would be a good idea. Is it possible for us to interject a 30-day window in there in addition? I believe there still should be a late charge if it's past the period. But this whole idea of the scarlet letter on the door is, I think 15 years ago, I got one on my door and it was because there was a death in the family and we were out, who knows, we were all, whatever. That bothered me, enraged me, embarrassed me, and that was a long time ago. Talking to that gentleman, I wish, whatever cycle that we have for when it becomes late, put the late fee on there. But I think it would be really nice for us to discuss maybe, or some sort of consideration of the red tag of shame not being put on the front door, right? Disconnect notice. And I understand that the possibility of that being abused by some people, et cetera, but it's severe. Things happen in life, bank accounts, wrong account numbers are put in, things like that. And I'm sure it's not that widespread, but it's just one of those things that it strikes a really negative chord, I think, when that happens, when people aren't expecting it. But anyway, that's my 2 cents. It'd be nice. Once again, I'm not saying open the window for when it's late or not late. I think we can perhaps delay that disconnect notice or something, but.
Can I just say, I brought that up the day after during our staff meeting. We had a staff meeting and Desiree did go back and watch the video of it because she wanted to understand what he said because I was trying to explain it and I wasn't very good at it. And she sent an email back out to us saying that in review of that video and the statements made, they did change some practices regarding the late fees. I'd have to go back and look at the email, but she did, and I believe she called him to let him know because she was checking, I asked her to look at, she offered to look into it when I brought it up about what are we doing.
Yeah, nice. Okay.
Yeah, during this changeover to Tyler, we'd implemented that we weren't shutting people off, but To be honest, the red tag is sort of one of our few measures we have the ability to collect on accounts. And we had made a decision months ago during implementation that we would continue to do the red tags, but we weren't shutting off. And we're also during that heat advisory period, which went through the end of September, we weren't allowed to shut people off.
How late are they before they get the red tag?
They'd be more than almost 2 months past due before you get it.
It's the red tag that bothers me. I don't care about the, rest of it. I mean, and have staff spend their time running around town putting red tags on doors to make people embarrassed and enraged. I had a new grandson up in Seattle and we were going back and forth, and I had a Pacific Power bill that was 2 months that went by. Pacific Power has been a red sticker on my door. You know what I mean? I don't know of a business that does. There could be disposal services, I guess, could be putting red flags on people's doors. I think it's antiquated and a little. It's upsetting, and I understand it. I'm not saying don't put a late charge on there or whatever, but I think nothing quite like coming home from work and seeing that on your door. Yeah.
It could be considered to push it out to 90 days or something. I don't know. We're just discussions,
Yeah, discussion.
but something, because I could imagine I'd be pretty dang upset if I came, but then again, if I didn't pay, but that's why I'm saying 2 months behind. I could see how that could happen, because I got to say that has happened to me, based on disposal, just because I got confused of bills. But I don't know, most places don't consider it really, really bad until 90 days past due. But just something, I'm just throwing it out there, something to think about. It's not an order.
It's in our code, so we'd have to do a code change. Yeah.
That's what I thought. And I was even thinking we need to run it past perhaps legal or something, but just, look, I just think if we could take it under consideration, I think I would appreciate it. I think others might also. So we'd have to rewrite that. I understand that. Things happen in life, and go down the list. And that's a little severe, but anyway.
All right. Thank you. Councilmember Cleveland.
So between them being late and the red tag, are there additional steps in there? Is there does a staff member reach out before putting the red tag on?
Yes, they're given 2 or 3 notifications, a late notice saying that their water could be turned off.
Is that through the mail or is that like a phone call?
That is through the mail.
Oh, okay.
I wonder about that, because I get electronic and I have never seen, not that mine's ever been late, but I've never seen an attachment to my bill. I believe Desharis or somebody said that there was a yellow insert reminding people that it's going to be changing over.
That was sent out individual mailings to everybody.
In an email, right. So, but it wasn't attached to the bill.
Or attached to the bill.
It was attached to the electronic bill?
I'd have to confirm.
Yeah, anyways, okay. But did that answer your question?
I was just curious if it would be feasible to, before we send someone to go out to someone's house and door and put a red tag on, if we could do a phone call, maybe a week in advance, save us from a little bit of time running out there, or is that just not feasible?
Yeah, I would say staff capacity doesn't have that time.
Our capacity is maxed.
Plus, it's pretty hard to call somebody. I mean, I've done collections on the phone, so it's pretty hard to call somebody and tell them that their bill's late, because then you open yourself up to some abuse.
That's true.
And I wouldn't want the staff to go through
Yeah,
that.
and there's between 30 and 40 red tags a month.
Oh, okay, that's a lot.
Wow.
Of which we shut off between 5 and 10 waters a month.
And once again, just for consideration, I think it's a case of, yes, there can still be there can be warnings that go out either electronically or in the mail or whatnot. And there can be a late fee. if it's possible for us just to put another 30 days in there before the scarlet letter goes out, it's something to think about. It's all going to work out anyway at some point. It's just, it may be delayed for some
Oh,
people.
we have
Yeah.
a group of customers that owe us $10,000 to $15,000 in unpaid utility bills. And
So
the
what-
water is shut off.
Their water is shut off?
Mhm.
Why don't we send them to collections or put a lien on there?
Collections and they're on a lien.
They're on a lien.
Yeah.
Okay, then that's all we can do. Yeah.
Well, that begs the question again, if somebody, my water bill's 180, so 10,000. So were they not shut off immediately or what?
Oh, they've been shut off for years, those bad accounts.
Oh, but
But how did they get to
Some of them are-
10,000?
Some of them are stormwater only.
yeah.
They don't
Okay.
get our water. So,
Oh, you're talking about big accounts. Yeah.
no, they're residential accounts.
I'm confused. A residential can get up to a $10,000 balance.
In 2 months?
Oh, no, that's for years. I mean, but that's the total amount they owe. Oh, if someone's being shut off?
So
Yeah, well, we just follow the code, so.
Oh, so they can be shut off, but the bill keeps going for the stormwater and other
Well, everything
expenses.
keeps going. They still get charged each month, whether if their water's shut off, they're still gonna charge base fees.
Yes, right.
They're gonna charge base
Right.
fees, taxes, and ambulance utility, stormwater, wastewater.
And I guess I would argue that a red flag isn't going to affect them.
Not that handful of
Yeah.
citizens.
I think it's like the occasional, so out of this 30 or 40 a month,
A lot
5 are
are
hard.
recurring.
Yeah, okay. Well, so then I think if we could insert 30 days.
No,
in there.
if you guys want us to.
Just
change
discuss it,
the
Mike.
code, then-
Just discuss it. If you don't want to do it, let's not do it. I'm just, in discussing that with the gentleman the other day, last, it was like, and I know things come up, so.
There's a pretty narrow window between the time the bill's due, and if you miss a month, then it's only, by the time the late fees go out and whatnot, it's only weeks until the possibility of shut off.
That's where like that insertion of 30 days or something, right there, because that's true. It could be just a few weeks and all of a sudden.
Are we
Yeah,
able
you're-
to just review the
months
code
behind
then,
pretty
just to
quick.
see?
Yeah.
Can we review the code and then just to see? Because it sounds to me, if I understand correctly, it's one of those difficult things of like what's effective, because you still, of course, need to make people aware. But how do you do so in a way that's both effective for them, but also effective for us to make the collections we need? So if there's 30 or 40
Might I
tags going out.
suggest we put this on the agenda for a future workshop?
Well, that's a future workshop coming in. Yeah, thank you. You're trying to get, I know. But a future workshop is having the ordinance or this maybe looking through or seeing the data to see what's most effective.
We can do that.
Yeah, we'll talk. All right.
Well, in all honesty, it is effective.
Well,
No. All right. Any other business for good of the order? No? Okay. If there's no objections, it's now concluded. The workshop is concluded at 8:54 PM.